Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 2661, The Sacred Mallow Temple. Bending downwards, Zen stretched his arms and picked up a handful of sand from the ground. The sand radiated a slight tinge of warmth. If examining carefully, one could definitely feel that the sand had a hint of energy from within. No one fuses with the crimson golden sand, because it is the weakest kind of other shore tokens. It only contains the force of half a divine megaton, Dorothy explained. She lifted her hand and began to point at some bare stones not so far away from where they were and continued, "See those stones? Those are the heavenly cyan stones. Whenever a warrior fuses with it, they automatically gain the force of a divine megaton." Heavenly cyan stone. Zen's eyes widened as soon as he saw the familiar stones. He recalled that he saw one when Monica had brought him into the Dragon City for the very first time. Someone had verified his strength using the red stone in the city. He had the force of 2 divine megatons, and his other shore token was a heavenly cyan stone. Taking a step forward, Zen carefully picked up a heavenly cyan stone from the ground and observed it keenly. Scanning the stone very meticulously, he found that the power radiated by the stone was stronger than that of the crimson golden sand. So I guess that what they're saying is true. It seems that the other shore is a place full of treasures. You can literally get one on every corner, Zen said, heaving a heavy sigh. He was not afraid of any true god. In fact, he was even able to deal with a warrior who had just reached the other shore realm. Last time, he had used up all of his strength. However, the red stone only indicated that he merely had the force of 1 divine megaton. Frustrated by the result, he desired such a stone that could double his force. Now that he had found one, it would be easier for him to strengthen himself. "This is not our goal. Let's go," Dorothy reminded as she walked forward. Coming from a great background, she belittled such other shore tokens as if they were useless. Even after the fusion, warriors could change their other shore tokens. However, Dorothy was quite different from the rest as she was not in a hurry to do so. Upon arriving at the other shore, most people chose to walk forward and explore. On the contrary, there were also some who would rather stay in place and not move far away from where they were. With the goal of enhancing their strength, these people combined with the heavenly cyan stones, hoping for a speedy improvement. The other shore was a powerful area. Everything around it radiated power, a grain of sand, a leaf, basically everything that anyone could get their hands on. In this area, warriors could basically integrate with anything they could touch. Meanwhile, Zen moved along the beach and felt the strong energy aura with every step he took. In fact, he really didn't know what kind of place the other shore was. It didn't belong to any part of the chaos, and it felt as if this place was a complete product of one's imagination. But the moment his soul stepped into the other shore, everything felt so real. The beach stretched to about 6 or 7 miles long. Zen and Dorothy were able to cross it in 5 minutes. The powerful beach was next to a lot of other beautiful and dynamic places. But what captured his eyes most was the green plain next to it that boasted its luscious trees and breeze. This one is called Angelica diurica. Its function is almost the same as the heavenly cyan stone and they are regarded as the weeds of the other shore. Although it is suitable for the truth of eternal sword intent, I still think that it is too weak. This is a birch leaf. It has a healing effect after being fused. Wait, look at that. That one is the... Dorothy pointed at every different thing she had seen in the Origin Mountain. Even though it was her first time to enter the other shore, she was already quite familiar with the ordinary things in the area. In fact, she could recognize them with just a quick glance. She knew them like the back of her hands. No matter how much she knew about those tokens, it was still apparent that she did not want to fuse with them. Is there any chance that we could use a creature as another shore token? Upon seeing all of the tokens around the area, Zen suddenly thought of a seemingly wild question. Let it be in the divine land or the source world, Zen had never laid his eyes on a warrior who would use a living creature as another shore token. Dorothy nodded. Yes, but it happens very rarely. From the ancient times up until now, the fusion of living creatures is rarely seen due to its immense difficulty. The other shore was full of life. There might be living creatures here, but it was still difficult for souls of light to capture them. Moreover, these creatures on the other shore had already killed countless people. On the other hand, there was a master in the Origin Mountain who had fused with a heaven divine ape. Integrating with the ape gave him huge progress, making him one of the well-known masters in the Origin Mountain. Meanwhile, as Dorothy and Zen talked to each other, 3 people from a distance started to walk towards them. The person who led the group stepped forward, greeting them. Looking directly at the 2 warriors, the man spoke, "Hello. Would you like to join us?" It seemed that these 3 had just arrived at the other shore along with them. Judging from the souls of light that they had, they were perceived to be the best among the over 100 warriors. The 3 had noticed that Zen's and Dorothy's auras were extraordinary. Hence, they invited the 2 after they had examined them further and seen what they got. "What can we get if we accept the invitation?" Dorothy walked up and asked seriously. Stretching his hand, the leader opened his palm gently, which showed some dense stripes. Afterwards, these stripes changed in form as they turned into a map. Upon seeing the stripes, Zen's eyes flashed in interest. Looking at it, he realized that it was exactly the same as the other shore keys that he had. Curious, he leaned forward and took a closer look, but apparently he found something different. The copper sheet was gone and only those stripes were left. As for the map, it was almost the same as what the ear mouse had given him. Needless to say, one of the other shore keys that he had and the one in the man's hand were the same. "I've got another shore key of the sacred Mallow Temple. Now, if that strikes your interest, then you are welcome to explore the place with us," the leader said. It was a good thing for Zen to get such information. After all, another shore key in stage 1 was also precious and rare. To be honest, Zen was a little interested, but didn't answer right away. He knew too little about the other shore, so he wanted Dorothy to decide for the both of them. After all, the other shore key in his hand was just the same as what the man had. Even if he didn't join them, he would still be able to find the sacred Mallow Temple using the exact same map. Originally, Dorothy had planned to take a stroll around the place with Zen as she was not in such a hurry. She wanted to take things slow and discuss the fusion of the other shore tokens with Zen later. But when she saw the eagerness in Zen's eyes to go with the men, she nodded and agreed. The head of the group said happily, "That's great. We 3 have just entered the other shore and want to acquire a better other shore token. The journey should be smooth now that you 2 are on the team." On the way, the 3 men started to introduce themselves. They belonged to a remote group of the human race. Their leader was Hammer D, the eldest brother, with siblings Harding D and Hackett D. In contrast to their big brother, both Harding and Hackett were very quiet and reserved. "So, which group of the human race do you belong to?" Hammer asked. "The Origin Mountain," Dorothy replied curtly. Hearing her answer, the 3 of them changed their attitudes and showed respect towards her. Hammer even made a bow and said, "Why, you are from the Oneness Sky Palace. I've always been admiring you guys." Despite being in the same race, they still had a great desire and admiration for the top 3 forces of the human race. But Dorothy did not respond, for she was extremely scornful about this kind of worship. In fact, before she met Zen, she had always been very pessimistic about her own identity. Most of the time, she even envied those ordinary people of the Dragon City as she wanted to live a life of simplicity. At least, they could struggle for their future and embrace the future that they worked hard for. In short, they could have a choice and run their lives the way they wanted to. Since she was born, everything had already been arranged for her, and everything had been the same. She lived a life of monotony. Meanwhile, Hammer continued to lead them through the plain based on the map shown by the other shore key. After making a turn, they arrived at a curved canyon with a dilapidated temple leaned against its cracks. Apparently, this was the so-called sacred Mallow Temple that Hammer was referring to. Despite the temple being old and dilapidated, its workmanship remained very advanced, along with its exquisite structure. Zen stared at the temple from a distance and started to think, who could have built this on the other shore? However, when Zen and the others got close to the sacred Mallow Temple, they found that they weren't the only ones wanting to enter it. Chapter 2662, The Heavenly Cobweb. 7 people stood at the gate of the sacred Mallow Temple, while another team gathered on the side of a cliff. They, however, seemed to be waiting for something, making no intentions of entering the temple. The group looked animated upon seeing Zen, Hammer and their group. Dorothy knew these people's purpose immediately. She smiled faintly and murmured, "It seems like they want to take advantage of you." Poor wretches. Hammer grumbled to himself. The other shore key of stage 1 was precious for most people, despite being easy to obtain. Right now though, none of them had the other shore key. All they could do was wait patiently outside the temple. As soon as the door opened, there followed a window of time in which it wouldn't close. By then, only particularly powerful forces would be able to stop them. After it opens, how long would it take before it closes? Zen asked. Every temple is different. The sacred Mallow temple, for example, will stay open for about an hour, Hammer replied. When the souls of light first came to the other shore, the first temple they encountered was the sacred Mallow temple, so it had been visited frequently, with most of the treasures inside already taken away. Let's go over there, Dorothy said, pointing towards the temple entrance. Over 10 people on the cliff followed as they walked towards the temple. As they neared, the 7 who blocked the entrance parted, making way. One of them chuckled and said, I've been waiting here for half a month. Finally, you guys come to open the door. Hammer ignored the remark and walked straight to the temple's gate. On the right side of the door was a small square that sported unusual patterns. As Hammer slapped it with his palm, the door frame began to glow faintly. Ahaha, the temple door gradually vanished as the light shone brighter. The door's open, let's go. The group that was blocking the door earlier entered in a frenzy, completely oblivious of Hammer who stood still. Zen couldn't see Hammer's face, but he imagined a scowl forming. Am I too kind? Should I teach them a lesson? Hammer sneered. Hammer was one of the 3 pioneers during the process of approaching the other shore this time. He had been in the Sea of Truth for many years, amassing much more experience and strength than ordinary people. Even Zen felt vaguely threatened by the soul aura emanating from him out of anger. Just ignore these reckless idiots, Hammer. They will die inside anyway, Harding said as he tried to comfort his brother. Hammer closed his eyes and took a long breath. Although he was still glaring, he quietly joined the other 4 as they entered the temple. As soon as he entered the temple, Zen felt a suppressed aura harboring strong energy. Since the temple is built with objects from the other shore, can we use the bricks and stones as other shore tokens? Zen asked. Dorothy laughed, her voice low. The temple seems uncharacteristically spotless inside and out, don't you think? The temple itself was dilapidated, but Dorothy was right. As Zen scanned his surroundings, he could see no broken thing. We can certainly use the bricks and stones here as other shore tokens, but our souls of light will have quite the trouble destroying them, Dorothy answered as she shrugged her shoulders. Then why is the temple in such a dilapidated condition? Zen inquired further. Dorothy blinked and replied, it can't be destroyed now, but it doesn't mean that proved true in the past. You know, people could cross the Sea of Truth with their bodies long ago. It was a common practice in the past. Since the truths in the chaos had changed, however, nobody was able to do such a thing again. Upon hearing the story, Zen seemed to have figured something out. If we break off the bricks and stones here, we can sell them at a good price, Dorothy finished. The 2 of them shared suggestive smirks. The 3 who were walking in front of them looked at one another in confusion. If anything, breaking off the temple bricks and stones seemed more like wishful thinking. The Origin Mountain thought highly of Zen, but unlike others, it was not his talent of instant enlightenment that caught their eyes. Instead, it was the possibilities he could do by having his body on the other shore. Navigating the inner part of the temple was complicated business. The 5 of them had to avoid not only the many places that had collapsed, but large gaping holes that were everywhere as well. Zen took note of thousands of strange statues he passed by along the way. They were neither statues of humans nor of any other beasts he had encountered. They had eyes, but no other feature suggested they had appeared in this era. What race built this temple? Zen thought to himself. At this moment, a voice from up front claimed excitedly, look. The heavenly cobweb. We seem to be very fortunate. The heavenly cobweb. Hammer's face darkened as the 3 of them quickly strode forward. The heavenly cobweb was one of the most impressive other shore tokens of stage 1. More importantly, it was hard to come by. Hammer couldn't let the first few men get it. A fine cobweb hung on a corner. The 7 people who scurried past Hammer earlier stood beneath it in amazement. We opened the sacred Mallow temple. This other shore token should belong to us. Don't claim it for yourselves. Hammer and his 2 brothers silently climbed up the stairs, stopping at the narrow corridor. Who do you think you are? One of the group sneered. The temple is open for everyone. We grab the treasures by our abilities. What we find belongs to us. Obviously, they didn't plan to surrender. Countless visitors had taken many of the treasures inside the sacred Mallow temple. The heavenly cobweb was rare enough that no one wanted to give up easily. Splash! A tense atmosphere pervaded the temple as everyone released their soul auras. They glared at each other with hostility, signaling the start of a battle of the souls of light. Just then, the third team arrived and immediately saw the heavenly cobweb. Naturally, they knew of its rarity and wanted to grab it as well. Warriors fighting each other for other shore tokens was a common occurrence. Are we going to help them? Zen asked. Hammer and his brothers had invited Zen and Dorothy to the temple, so it was only right that they helped. Dorothy hesitated. She said, the heavenly cobweb is made by the heavenly spider. But the heavenly spider shouldn't have appeared on the first floor. Just as she said this, a snow-white spider thread started falling near the temple's entrance. It wound around the statues on both sides of the entrance. As the thread twisted them, the statues' heads rotated left and right. Simultaneously, the eyes of all the statues inside the temple glowed white. Chapter 2663, Screams. The eyes of the outermost statue glowed a bright white, emitting brilliant rays of flashing light. The rays pierced through someone's soul of light. The person let out a shrill scream. It was a woman's voice. Her soul of light twisted and thrashed, trying to break free from the rays of white light that had impaled her. Her efforts were in vain. The light held her in place, glowing brightly, as her screams began to dwindle. Finally, silence fell. The woman had melted in the light. Two more rays of radiant white light shot through the air, emitted by the glowing eyes of the second statue. The group knew something was wrong. They immediately rushed away from the second statue. No one was pierced by the rays, as they narrowly escaped the melted woman's fate. But it wasn't over. The eyes of every other statue began glowing and pulsing, all emitting rays of white light. The rays crisscrossed each other, forming an irregular web of luminous white light. The net was tight at first, and then expanded, filling the temple. The temple was full of statues. As more and more of the statues were activated, shooting out streaks of light from their eyes, the group inside the temple realized they were running out of space to dodge the deadly rays. As Dorothy and Zen moved quickly through the temple, trying to find a way to escape, they saw a group of maybe around 7 people rushing in their direction. They were getting crowded, running out of room to evade the rays of light. Their hearts sank. We have to go up. Zen saw a stairwell ahead, and rushed into it without hesitation, dragging Dorothy behind him. Meanwhile, Hammer, Harding, Hackett and the other warriors were still struggling for the heavenly cobweb. But as they watched the glowing white web, which grew as more statues emitted rays of light from their eyes, their expressions changed. The web of light meant that this was now a matter of life and death. Their lives were more important than the other shore token, it would have to wait. They immediately gave up the battle and followed Zen and Dorothy up the stairwell to the next floor. The temple was more than 10 floors high, each level connected to the next via a spiral staircase. As Zen and Dorothy rushed up the steps, they heard another scream from behind. 3 of the people in the last group that entered the temple had been pierced by the rays of light, and found themselves trapped in the web. Someone stretched out a hand to a companion who had been caught in the web, trying to pull him free. But as soon as they touched, he found that he could no longer let go. He was tied to his companion's soul of light, both of them trapped by the rays of light. More screams sounded as the 4 people died. Zen heard the screams and knew people were dying. Why don't they just leave the other shore? He asked as he moved forward. Dorothy smiled bitterly. She said, I forgot to tell you. Once people have entered the temple, they can't just leave when they want. The other shore held many temples, large and small. Each one required a corresponding other shore key to be unlocked. People ventured inside not only for the chance to obtain an extremely rare and powerful other shore token, but also because it was said that the temples could strengthen souls. Of course, there was a catch. Every temple was incredibly dangerous. Dorothy had not been in a hurry to enter the temple. Of course, the Origin Mountain had better plans for her. Still, since the sacred Mallow Temple was only in stage 1 of the other shore, she had believed it would be relatively safe. Now she knew how naive she had been. What? Zen sounded rather helpless. Before entering the temple, Zen had considered the possible crises he might encounter, and the different countermeasures he could use. Once his soul of light was trapped in the temple, he would make his body cross the sea. That was why before entering, he had asked Dorothy how to use the other shore key. He realized now that he had been thinking too much. Buzz, buzz. Even as they ran upstairs, they weren't safe. The rays of white light bounced off the walls, floors, and ceilings, interlocking with each other, the web spreading quickly up the spiral staircase. The last group couldn't escape the web of light. Despite their hurry, the light struck them from behind, just as they reached the second floor. They screamed as their souls of light were pierced by the rays, and they melted away completely. By now, Zen and Dorothy were on the 3rd floor, while Hammer and his companions had sped up to reach the 4th floor. Everyone charged upstairs as fast as they could. They had no time to think what was waiting for them on the upper floors. They had no time to think of anything except escaping the immediate danger of the shining white web. They ran past the 4th floor, the 5th floor, the 6th floor. By the time they reached the 12th floor, all the floors and steps below were densely crisscrossed with the rays of white light, which never slowed down. While the people were getting tired, the rays didn't lose any momentum as they filled every available space. Then everyone reached the 13th floor, and found that there were no more stairs. This was the top of the temple. This was the end. On the far wall of the top floor stood a huge statue. As they stared at it, and even as the rays from below followed them up the stairs, the eyes of the statue began glowing with a white light. Buzz. This was it. Once the rays of light were released, everyone would die. There, over there, Dorothy gasped in Zen's ear. There seemed to be a few hollow spaces embedded in the walls. Zen saw what she was pointing at. Instantly he rushed towards the hollows, dragging her with him. They had barely reached one of the hollows when the white light flashed behind them. Ah! Screams echoed within the walls on the top floor as the rays pierced through several more victims, trapping their souls of light, and melting them. After what seemed like forever, the screams died down. Zen and Dorothy huddled down in the narrow hollow of the wall, hidden from the rays of light. They stayed as motionless as they could, feeling fortunate they had reached this hollow in time. If they had moved just a little bit slower, if they had reached this spot just a couple of seconds later, then they would have been too late, and their souls of light would have been melted. What is this light? Zen whispered, keeping completely still. Dorothy's voice was full of fear. It's soul-melting light. It's a notorious challenge in the bigger temples. But for this light to appear here in stage 1 of the other shore, it was unheard of before. This isn't supposed to be here. The souls of light, after undergoing heavy trials, could become able to compete with corporeal bodies. However, there were still things that could defeat the souls, and this deadly white light was one of them. How long will the light keep shining? It can't stay this bright for too long, can it? Asked Zen. After all, light was light. It consumed energy. It wouldn't be able to trap them for too long. No, I don't think it can, Dorothy said, having come to the same conclusion as Zen. Zen felt a rush of relief. This quickly changed to surprise when someone spoke up beside the two of them. Harding, Hackett, where are you? Are you all right? It was Hammer's voice. He and some other people had seen the hollows in the wall when Dorothy pointed at them, and had rushed to take cover as well. They had seized at the possibility of survival. Like Zen and Dorothy, they were crouched down in their hollows, safe from the light for the moment. I'm here. Yes, I'm fine, Harding whispered back. But Hackett didn't make it. When Harding and Hackett had rushed towards the hollows, Hackett had moved just a bit slower, and had been shot through by a ray of light. Upon hearing the news, Hammer groaned bitterly. The three of them had been filled with such hope and anticipation when they first stepped together onto the other shore. Yet now, mere hours later, Hackett was dead. Dorothy and Zen felt Hammer's sadness and shook their heads. Loss of life was not unexpected on the other shore. While the warriors who made it here were often extremely strong, and eager to gain even greater power in this place, it came with enormous risks. Indeed, in the source world, many people would arrange their funeral affairs before they started to cultivate, wary of dying on the other shore and leaving a soulless body. Zen and Dorothy could hear Hammer making sounds of grief near them. They wondered how many of them had reached the hollows in the wall and survived the white light. As they waited, they heard something new. It was a clicking sound, like something tapping or climbing on the wall. Zen strained to make out what was causing the sound. Then, to his shock, he heard a shout from the hollow beside theirs. What is this? Stop, don't move any closer. Ah! There was a shrill screech. Then, suddenly and ominously, the sound stopped. Chapter 2664, The Dreaded Eye Demons. The warriors hiding in the hollows got disrupted when a grief-stricken cry reverberated across the temple, echoing off the bare walls. Presumably, someone got killed. But the soul-melting light's deadly rays failed to penetrate the hollows on the walls, so how did this person get murdered? Harding, what just happened? Hammer bellowed. I don't know. It's this guy settled next to me, Harding answered in a shaky voice. The man who screamed just now was the leader of the group who had confronted Hammer earlier. Before Harding's voice fell to a whisper, he fumbled over his next few words. What are these? Monsters. Stay away. Harding, what's happening to you there? Hammer called at the top of his voice. Ah! Harding shrieked desperately, then his screams halted rather abruptly. Answer me, Harding, please, I'm begging you. No matter how much Hammer pleaded, his brother didn't respond. With the soul-melting light outside the hollows, nothing could be done to help out his brother. He just roared, no matter what monsters you are, come to me. Leave my brother alone, I'm going to tear you apart. As she listened to Hammer howl, Dorothy's face darkened. She never envisioned such a critical situation would befall her. The monsters, in particular, scared Dorothy out of her wits. She knew nothing about their origin and form, which made her more apprehensive. She squeezed in beside Zen despite the cramped space, soliciting for some comfort. The emotions of the soul of light could be easily sensed, and Zen sensed Dorothy's fear. He pulled her closer and coaxed her softly, don't be afraid. But what could they be? Dorothy sighed under her breath. Whatever they are, they would reveal themselves soon, Zen assured with certainty. He already encountered several incidents similar to this before, so he consciously knew how to manage the situation better than Dorothy. Just then, they heard loud, grinding bursts of sound which reflected from the nearby wall. Hammer's shaky voice came again, with a hint of anxiety and dread in it. Go away, what are you? No. Just like the previous confrontations, the sobbing stopped after a few seconds. This time, Zen's brows knitted a pensive frown. Despite its mixed reputation, if expressed appropriately, anger led to many beneficial consequences. It made people act brave and forced them to be energized in dealing with conflicts. The situation Hammer dealt with when his two younger brothers got killed one by one forced him to be enraged. His vexation made him fearless. Besides, Hammer excelled in all aspects, and he always showed an ability to take risks. What on earth frightened him to such an extent? Nothing made sense. What the heck could those things be? Dorothy wailed, burying her head against Zen's shoulder. The two souls would have fused as one if only the souls of light were intangible. Zen kept his silence and simply stared at the opening of the hollow. As a matter of fact, he felt alarmed as well, but his survival instincts kicked in. He needed to calm down and be ready for any possible danger that could happen. Clip-clop, clip-clop, clunk, clunk, the light footsteps on the wall returned, only this time the noise sounded within close range. It came from the hollow beside them. Dorothy trembled with fear, like leaves quivering in the breeze. With her body hunched down in horror, she shifted her focus towards the sound. Traces of black liquid leaked out on each side of the rickety and grim walls. This dark ink abruptly transformed into tiny, black balls, as they trickled down the surfaces. Crack! These small black balls suddenly split from the middle, revealing small round eyeballs one after the other. What in the world are these? Arg! Dorothy screeched, her body shaking excessively. When Zen examined the eyeballs, he instantly recalled the odd statues inside the sacred Mallow temple. In fact, without the eyes, those figures looked nothing like statues. The artist carved in unusual shapes, curved, angular, and twisted. Only the eyes gave life and meaning to those statues. When the eyeballs released black light, the fear in Zen's heart strengthened. He recognized the inexplicable sense of familiarity right after his heart started to beat faster. In the debate venue of the Sword Clan in the Divine Land, Harper released the truth of goodwill and malice. The malice it bore aimed to liberate the inner fear of humans. Nevertheless, these eyeballs in front of him seemed strange and excluded the power of the truth of godly way. They were designed to uncover the fear in one's soul. Dorothy's high-pitched cry rang in Zen's ears, intensifying his terror. At this moment, Zen noticed that his soul of light became tensed and went beyond his control. Zen, I have a very simple approach to fight these dreaded eye demons. Do you want to know? The voice of number 9527 verbalized suddenly. Tell me, get to the point. Zen tried to stay sober and vigilant though he knew he couldn't hold on for long. Once fear established control over his whole body, it would be the end. Dorothy's fate relied upon him, and the two of them would all be annihilated just like Hammer and his brothers if he let terror take over. Close your eyes and disconnect from the outside world. Cut off all of your spiritual sense. Empty your mind and concentrate. It shouldn't be complicated for you to do this with the guidance of the emotion-closing godly way. Don't stare at the eyeballs. Just one glimpse and any great warrior would be slain, number 9527 said. Before it could finish, Zen already closed his eyes. Zen did as he was told, he cut off all of his spiritual sense and activated the emotion-closing godly way. The ethereal soul arrows radiated with golden light on the surface of his soul. In the past, the sharpened soul arrows had aided Zen in achieving his killing moves. The emotion-closing godly way helped sharpen and refine those arrows to flawlessness. But after he entered the source world where his soul couldn't be considered strong, he rarely used this skill. However, Zen recognized his ability to put himself into a state of mind blanking where he just shut down and meditated. When Zen's awareness of the outside world subdued, the fear that surged in his heart beforehand instantly vanished. But the two senses of touch and hearing from his soul of light persisted. He sensed those eyeballs advancing towards him. Simultaneously, he overheard Dorothy cry even louder. The stress caught up with her as she started to break down. "No, Zen, they got me. They're dragging me out, please, help me." No matter how frantic Dorothy called out, Zen acted as if he hadn't heard it. But he still clasped Dorothy tightly in his arms, not yielding at all. They were stuck in the hollow, not dragged out by the dreaded eye demons. The dreaded eye demons seem weak, Zen contemplated. He figured that Hammer and his brothers weren't killed by the dreaded eye demons. Fear controlled them until they lost the ability to resist. Just like Dorothy, but Zen clutched Dorothy tightly, and the dreaded eye demons failed to draw her out of the hollow. She survived because she wasn't exposed to the soul-melting light. If that would be the case. Zen concentrated once more and raised his hand gently. His fingers gradually changed into thorns and he poked the air before him with his fingers. In this process, Zen measured the distance thoroughly so his fingertips wouldn't extend outside the hollow. He took extra precaution for his fingertips to remain within the domain of the hollow. His attempts would deem useless if he brushed upon the soul-melting light and perished. Zen tried a few times but failed to stab the dreaded eye demons. He felt the force pulling Dorothy away had increased. Clearly, the dreaded eye demons began to get agitated. Zen sneered, his lips slightly curled upward. He thrust at the air with his thorn-like fingers more aggressively. After he tried more than 100 times, one of the thorns pierced through an eyeball. Snip, ensuing a strange cry, the force yanking Dorothy eased. Chapter 2665, A Puppet. The force that had been trying to drag Dorothy out dissipated gradually. But she still hugged Zen tightly, and it took her a long time to calm herself down. Just thinking of those black eyeballs, she couldn't help but quiver in fear. "Zen, are the eyeballs gone?" Dorothy buried her face in Zen's neck, her voice shaking. "Not yet." Zen sympathetically wrapped his arm around her waist, trying to calm her down. They could still hear something streaking across the stone wall. Click, click, clang. Just now, Zen had shut his eyes tight, jabbing his fingers aimlessly into the dark. Luckily, he managed to stab one of the dreaded eye demons. The dreaded eye demons had backed off momentarily. But Zen knew it was only a matter of seconds before they came back to attack them. The sound of them crawling on the wall seemed to come from all around them. They just don't know when to give up, Zen thought as he gritted his teeth. As if reading his thoughts, Dorothy began to shiver violently, extremely fearful of what was to come. She never wanted to feel that horrible sense of dread again. Zen lowered his head and tried to concentrate as the sound seemed to close in on them. Although he didn't fear them, he still needed to figure out how to slay them. "What godly way have you cultivated?" Zen suddenly asked. While the truth of eternal sword intent could not affect one's mind, there were still some godly ways that could control one's mind, they could even block out the feeling of fear. Zen's eyes flashed as he considered his options. The Great Dominance technique seemed most apt, as it could remove one's consciousness, rendering the body a lifeless puppet. I've practiced the 5 elements godly way," Dorothy answered confusedly, obviously not following Zen's train of thought. Most people in the source world chose to practice the 5 elements godly way, as this was the quickest and most convenient one. "Don't worry, Dora," Zen said in a soothing voice. "They are not scary at all. They can only manipulate your mind, making you think you've fallen into deep despair. If you can control your fear, you won't feel the despair." "But how in the world do I control my fear?" Dorothy whined. Her body tensed as soon as she heard the sound of the monsters. Even though her eyes were closed, she could still vividly remember the fear inflicted on her at the sight of the dreaded eye demons. Here they come again. This time, black liquid began to appear on the top and bottom walls of the hollow. When Zen saw the liquid, he closed his eyes, shut off his spiritual sense, and severed all of his emotions. Dorothy trembled. She had no idea how to deal with her fear. As the liquid became many black eyeballs, she fell into despair again. "Soul arrows," Zen cried. Since he still kept his eyes shut, he was unable to see where his targets were. The soul arrows shot out blindly and haphazardly. Swish, 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 swish. The opening of the hollow was very small, and with so many soul arrows shooting toward the opening, Zen thought he could hit the eyes. No matter how many soul arrows were shot in the dark, Zen couldn't seem to hit any target. Zen frowned, puzzled as to why no soul arrow connected with the target. Just as he was about to summon another volley, Dorothy shouted, "They are here. Above our heads, and beside us. They are everywhere." Zen gritted his teeth in frustration. It had completely slipped his mind that the dreaded eye demons were but a mass of black liquid. Of course his arrows missed. They could transform into eyeballs after they came into the hollow. Just then, an idea came to his mind, and an unquestionable aura came out of his soul. Most of the godly ways use the momentum of life vitality and the inner world, but some of them could affect one's soul. The Great Dominance Technique and the emotion-closing godly way could do so. Great Dominance Technique. Zen's soul exuded an aura of unmatched authority, aimed directly at Dorothy. Usually, Dorothy's soul of light was just a few notches lower than Zen's in terms of strength, meaning such a spell would have no effect on her. However, under these circumstances, she was paralyzed by fear, consequently, she could not resist his Great Dominance Technique. As the words left Zen's lips, Dorothy's body instantly went limp. Her eyes stared blankly at nothing, lifeless as a rag doll. She was like a puppet, waiting for the puppet master to dictate her next action. Zen tightened his embrace to prevent Dorothy from being dragged out while searching her soul for a way to activate the necklace of mystic soul that hung from her neck. Zen painstakingly made his way through Dorothy's memory flame. The memory flame of a person was typically very messy, as this was a string of all the memories one collected over their lifetime. He wandered around aimlessly at first, as he had not used this technique before. As he continued to explore, he stumbled upon a massive locked door. "I wonder what this is." Zen began to reach for the doorknob, curiosity consuming him. Why would a closed door exist in Dorothy's memories? Just as his hand hovered a few inches from the doorknob, he felt a strong force urging him to step back. Zen shook his head. Now was not the time to think about this door, he had more pressing issues at hand. After a short while, he finally found the memory pertaining to the usage of the necklace of mystic soul. Meanwhile, the black mass had made its way to Dorothy's and Zen's torsos, massive black threads coiling around them ominously. The menacing eyeballs blinked as they climbed over their shoulders. It seemed that the dreaded eye demons wouldn't give up until they were dragged out. Dorothy's lifeless body suddenly moved. She clumsily put her hands on her chest, lightly touching the necklace of mystic soul. Buzz! A blue light burst from the necklace, piercing every corner of the hollow. Under the bright light, the black eyeballs became abnormally weak. Cracks began to make their way across the surfaces of the eyeballs, as eyeball after eyeball exploded. The black liquid seemed to bubble and boil until it evaporated completely. "I did it." Zen then opened his eyes and looked at the black stains on the walls with a smile. However, Dorothy remained lifeless in his arms. It took him a few seconds before he realized she was still his puppet, trapped by his Great Dominance Technique. Zen quickly released her from the spell. Gradually, Dorothy began to feel life return to her body. She blinked, and stared at him blankly, having no clue as to what just happened. "I just used the Great Dominance Technique to control you," Zen explained with a hearty laugh. He gestured at the black stains on the walls. "Look, they were killed by your necklace." Zen grinned from ear to ear. Although he had known that Dorothy's necklace was powerful, it still ended up exceeding his expectations. Were they really killed? As Dorothy observed the stains on the walls, she felt the spirit of fear leave her. "Wait, did you say Great Dominance Technique? Then, did you see?" She knew that in order for Zen to have used her necklace, he'd have had to explore her memory flame. Her cheeks flushed a deep red. How embarrassing. "Please, don't worry. I just looked for the way to use the necklace of mystic soul," Zen interrupted, flashing the most reassuring smile he could muster. He couldn't mention that locked door. He also had many secrets. He didn't want Dorothy to feel as though she'd been pried open and peeked into. "Okay." Dorothy sighed with relief. Zen's expression grew grim once Dorothy turned away. He had had no choice but to lie to her, but that was the least of their worries. "However, there's still something strange about it," Zen said and looked at the black stains. The eyeballs spread like water on the walls. The sound they created when they were moving was not the same as what we heard before. There should be something else outside besides these eyeballs. Zen decided to omit the fact that the monsters were called the dreaded eye demons, lest he would need to explain how he knew it. "There's something else outside?" Dorothy asked nervously, the fear returning. "But, I think that thing can't move anymore," he replied reassuringly. "At least, it hasn't moved in a while. Whatever was waiting for them outside had to wait." They couldn't leave until the soul-melting light disappeared. Chapter 2666, Sacred Mallow Temple Secrets. The soul-melting light continued for more than 2 hours. Afterward, its rays gradually became dimmer until it finally dissipated. The whole sacred Mallow Temple remained quiet. The atmosphere was rather ominous. "Let's get out of here," Zen said. But fear still lurked in Dorothy's mind as she thought of those black eyeballs. "Don't worry, those creatures aren't very powerful. They can only depend on the soul-melting light to kill people. Even if they were not dead, they still wouldn't be a match for me," Zen persuaded with confidence. If the dreaded eye demons were truly powerful, Zen and Dorothy would not be able to resist them at all. With vigilant eyes, Zen walked out of the hollow first. Behind him was Dorothy, who carefully stuck out her head to peep at the external environment. There were black stains on the walls. Zen looked at the trace of the black stains to see where the dreaded eye demons came from. With a sharp glare, he investigated the tracks left behind. On the other side of the 13th floor, a light golden object was lying on the balcony. Zen walked along the corridor to the balcony. With a curious expression, he examined the object and narrowed his eyes. A spider. A scared expression painted Dorothy's face as she also followed after him. When she saw the golden object, her face lit up with joy. "It's the heavenly spider." It finally made sense. That spider net on the first floor must be left behind by this spider. Someone in the Oneness Sky Palace had the heavenly spider as his other shore token. Dorothy had already seen his heavenly spider before. Thus, she immediately recognized it with a glance. "Maybe it's the heavenly spider that attacked us just now," said Dorothy after she thought for a moment. "That doesn't make sense. The heavenly spider is already dead." Zen fiddled with it, but it stayed motionless on the floor. "I don't think what happened just now is that simple." As he maintained his curious expression, Zen stretched out his hand and turned the heavenly spider over. Interestingly, he found a small hole between the spider's head and abdomen. Additionally, around the hole were black dots. When Zen reached for the tiny hole, the heavenly spider, which was originally like a dead thing, suddenly contracted. A surprised expression painted both Zen's and Dorothy's faces as the spider turned over and climbed up along the wall rapidly. Click, 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 click. What piqued Zen's interest was that the sound made by the heavenly spider while moving on the wall was exactly the same as to what they had heard before. Fear slowly crept deep inside Dorothy's heart. A sharp light flashed across Zen's eyes. He stretched out his finger and flicked. Suddenly, a small soul arrow shot out. Crack! The small soul arrow traveled with fast speed. Immediately, it pinned the heavenly spider onto the wall. Afterward, Zen's palm gradually changed into a small knife. With it, he could cut the heavenly spider from the wall. Then, he cut the spider in half from its head to its abdomen. Sizzle! Suddenly, black balls the size of a bullet gushed out of the cut one after the other. "Ah, what the heck, not this again." As she looked at those small black balls, Dorothy's face turned pale. It seemed that she would always remember what she had encountered in the sacred Mallow Temple. Sizzle! The small balls were immediately torn apart. From inside them burst out extremely small eyeballs. The little eyeballs could instill fear into those around them. However, they were much weaker than those Zen and Dorothy had encountered before. Zen resisted their attacks without any effort. "They are the descendants of those creatures. Look how little they are. They haven't grown up yet. There's no danger," said Zen as he pointed his finger at the little eyeballs. With a simple finger snap, an eyeball would explode and immediately turn into a pool of black liquid. A lot of small eyeballs had already escaped from the body of the heavenly spider. With great speed, they rushed in the direction of the wall. Nonetheless, the descendants of the dreaded eye demons would still do harm to other warriors. As such, Zen wouldn't let them go. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. In the blink of an eye, Zen had already killed a large number of them. His strength was tons above their dexterity, so he was able to easily erase them. However, there were still some descendants of the dreaded eye demons that moved along the wall. It seemed that they wanted to reach the back of the largest statue. "Why are they going there? What's behind that statue?" Zen murmured as he followed the eyeballs and swept over the huge statue. He was slightly stunned when he saw the scene behind the statue. Behind the statue, 3 tiny pillars stood firmly. There were 3 balls on the top of the 3 pillars, 2 red glazed eyeballs, and a pure white ball. When he saw that the small black eyeballs were about to enter the glazed eyeballs, Zen rushed and killed them with a single move. "Hey, what's behind the statue?" Dorothy rushed over and took a quick look. When she saw the white ball, her body suddenly froze. "The soul force in this white ball is very powerful," Zen said with a serious face. This should be the soul crystal. Wow, what a powerful soul crystal. It seems that there are countless people that died in the sacred Mallow temple. The souls of light that had been melted by the soul-melting light have been gathered in this ball, Dorothy said after she pondered for a while. Does the soul crystal like this one have the same effect as the soul pill? Zen asked as his curious eyes stared at the white ball. The aura he sensed from the white ball was very similar to that of the soul pill. With its massive power contained inside, it was like a huge soul pill. If the white ball had the same effect as the soul pill, Zen's opinion about it would greatly plummet. Soul pills were easily sold or purchased with divine crystals. No, it's something else. Dorothy shook her head as excitement became apparent in her expression. The soul pill can only restore the soul power and temporarily enhance the soul of light. However, a soul crystal can increase the upper limit of the soul of light. It can make our souls of light stronger. After he heard Dorothy's remark, Zen's eyes sharpened. When his soul was still weak, there were still many methods to strengthen it. However, after his soul became the soul of light, it became more difficult to strengthen it. Apart from the enhancement of his soul of light on the sea of truth, Zen did not find any other methods to strengthen it. However, the soul crystal might be his hope. If he could absorb it, he might be able to greatly strengthen his soul of light. Since soul crystal is so useful, aren't there any creatures that kill other souls of light to refine soul crystals? Zen asked cautiously. Some strong warriors were able to kill other souls of light and refine them into soul crystals so that they could use them to strengthen their souls of light. For some ambitious people, it was a convenient way to improve the power of their souls of light. Someone did it before. However, he lost his mind as a consequence, Dorothy said with a shrug. Except for the soul-melting light, it is extremely difficult to purify the soul of light with other methods. If you absorb the souls of light of others, you will also absorb their memory flames. If you absorb hundreds of people's memories, the result could only be chaotic. Got it. Zen nodded. Although he already knew what the white ball was, he still had no idea what the two glazed eyeballs were. Even Dorothy, who was well informed, didn't know what they were. Zen had no other choice but to ask number 9527 in his mind. Number 9527 chuckled. Ha, did you realize that? You were very lucky to survive this time. Huh, what do you mean? Zen asked as he knitted his eyebrows. This is not the sacred Mallow temple at all. Such a stupid name was only given by your human race. This temple originally belonged to the dreaded eye demons. As such there are countless dreaded eye demon statues in here, lectured number 9527. However, the temple has been destroyed long ago. Additionally, the dreaded eye demons have already gone to extinction. Perhaps some of them managed to come back to life. They must have manipulated a heavenly spider that had broken in accidentally. Afterward, they probably killed so many souls of light with the soul-melting light in order to rapidly reproduce and cultivate their own descendants. The soul crystal was prepared by the dreaded eye demons for their descendants. If Zen and Dorothy hadn't come, the race would have returned to life after a rather long rest. Unfortunately, the dreaded eye demons eventually died in the hands of Zen and Dorothy. Chapter 2667, Demonic Eyes. Although most of Zen's questions had been explained briefly by number 9527, he was still a little confused. Did the dreaded eye demons show up in the chaos once? Zen asked, intrigued by this information. Yes, you can say that. The dreaded eye demons were a huge race that once occupied a region, number 9527 answered him truthfully. Can all kinds of races in the chaos establish temples here on the other shore? Are they considered as extraordinary creatures? Zen asked again. He wanted to learn more about these creatures as much as he could. As for the extraordinary creatures in your eyes, number 9527 paused for a second, making Zen do the guessing. Strictly speaking, only those two demonic eyes of all the dreaded eye demons could be described as extraordinary creatures, so what you encountered just now were only their descendants. What's more, they were very weak. With your current strength, you can't defeat a mature dreaded eye demon yet. At that moment, Dorothy, who had been watching him, suddenly asked, Zen, why are you standing there in a daze? Dorothy didn't have any idea that Zen was actually communicating with number 9527, so she thought he was standing there daydreaming. When Zen was finally back to the present, he decided to absorb the soul crystal with Dorothy. They would have to stay on and explore the other shore for a long time. No one would give up the opportunity to strengthen their souls. The two of them sat in a corner and started concentrating. It didn't take long before they both released their spiritual senses into the soul crystal. Absorbing the soul crystal gave them the same feeling as the fusion of souls. To a certain extent, they were devouring the souls of light of another group of people. It was just that these souls of light had already been purified and readied for them to use. As the two continued to absorb the soul crystal without pause, the white ball shrank at a visible speed. The auras that the two souls of light released were greatly enhanced. 3 minutes had passed quickly. Dorothy had already withdrawn her spiritual sense. The soul crystal had already shrunk by half its original size. She and Zen had discovered the soul crystal together, so she was certainly qualified to share the soul crystal with him. However, in consideration that she still had other opportunities to strengthen her soul, she gave up the idea of continuing absorbing the soul crystal. For a moment, she just stared at Zen, who silently took in the remaining soul crystal. 10 minutes later, Zen finally absorbed the last wisps of the soul crystal. When he opened his eyes, he immediately felt the strange abundance of power coursing through his body. This soul crystal really has an extraordinary effect. Zen had practiced hard day and night on the Sea of Truth for several months, and his soul power had only increased a little after all that hardship. Meanwhile, after absorbing the soul crystal, he felt that his soul power had increased by at least 3 times. It was unbelievable. Of course, it does. Dorothy smiled. You've even integrated the souls of light of over 100 people. In fact, during the process where the souls of light were turned into the soul crystal by the soul-melting light, a big part of the souls of light were lost, so Dorothy was exaggerating when she said that, but the effects were still obvious now. After the soul crystal was totally absorbed by the two of them, they turned to look at the red glazed eyes. Do we take them as our other shore tokens? Zen asked. He had not forgotten that his true reason for entering the temple was to find a suitable other shore token for himself. The 2 glazed eyes in front of him also contained extraordinary power and he could feel it. Dorothy tilted her head and looked at the eyes closely. Even though she was knowledgeable, she had no idea what they truly were. No matter what they are, we can try and fuse them with ourselves. As long as they are not living creatures, they will not resist. Living creatures? Zen asked as he thought of the dead heavenly spider. As much as he could remember, the heavenly spider should have been dead for a long time now. It had been used as a puppet by the dreaded eye demons. Can I take the dead heavenly spider as my other shore token? He asked. Yes, you can. Anything on the other shore can be taken as your token, but fusing with a dead creature isn't a wise choice. In that case, it's better to fuse with the heavenly cobweb it had produced, Dorothy replied. Now, since there were 2 glazed eyes here, she didn't need to fuse with the heavenly cobweb. She and Zen could have 1 eye each to use. Zen walked towards the glazed eyes and stood in front of them. He reached out his hand to touch them for a while, and then said, I don't know how to fuse with the other shore token. Dorothy responded with a chuckle. She had always thought that Zen was a little strange. He knew a lot of things that many people wouldn't normally know, but he didn't have an inkling about the general knowledge in the source world. Let me teach you how to do it. It won't be too difficult to fuse with the other shore token, especially such a dead thing. It won't resist you. You only need to use the truth of godly way to fuse with it. As Dorothy spoke, she held up the other shore token to show Zen. Wisps of truth of eternal sword intent emerged from her body and covered the surface of the glazed eye. But when she tried to draw it into her soul of light, there was suddenly a repulsive force from the glazed eye. She looked at the other shore token in disbelief. She was unable to fuse with the glazed eye. What? Dorothy exclaimed in shock, still holding the glazed eye. What happened? Zen asked in confusion. This other shore token does not match the truth of eternal sword intent, Dorothy explained with her pouted lips. What do you mean? Another shore token will choose the truth of godly way? Zen asked curiously. Dorothy exhaled and said, it's rare. I heard that only very powerful other shore tokens could choose the truths of godly ways. I didn't expect this glazed eye would be one of them. The situation proved that the glazed eye was something extraordinary and definitely powerful. It was a pity that Dorothy couldn't fuse with it. Let me have a try. Zen grabbed the glazed eye and copied Dorothy's method, activating the truth of eternal sword intent. However, just like what happened with Dorothy, when Zen tried to draw it inside his soul, the glazed eye refused to fuse with it. Zen pondered over it for a while. Then he decided to stop using the truth of eternal sword intent and activated the truth of cultivation nature instead. This time, the glazed eye didn't resist and easily went into Zen's soul. It's the perfect match for the truth of cultivation nature. Dorothy blurted out in surprise. This was the advantage of cultivating 2 truths of godly ways. Since the glazed eye did not accept one of the 2 truths of godly ways, Zen could just use the other truth of godly way. However, different people had different compatibility with each kind of truth of godly way. Once a person had chosen one truth of godly way to cultivate, they usually wouldn't cultivate a second truth of godly way. When Zen absorbed the glazed eye into his soul, he could clearly perceive its existence in it. When Zen tried to manipulate the glazed eye, it rose in his soul of light and slowly moved into one of his own eyes. Dorothy saw that a scarlet light flashed out of Zen's blurred face. Just one glance, she let out a scream and retreated, extremely terrified. Zen closed his eyes, and the demonic red light disappeared just as quickly. "I'm sorry," Zen apologized, he was only trying to use the glazed eye, but he didn't expect Dorothy to have such a reaction. With the glazed eye, Zen could use the same skill that the dreaded eye demons had used. It could be useful during crucial moments. Dorothy explained she didn't mind, and said, "Wow, you can stir up the fear in one's mind. It is very rare to see such an Other Shore token in stage 1 of the Other Shore. I wonder how many divine megatons the force unleashed by this eye can be." The special ability of the Other Shore token was very important, but its own energy was just as significant. However, there was no way to test the glazed eye's ability on the Other Shore. He had to return to the Dragon City first. Chapter 2668, Return from the Other Shore. Dorothy was slightly upset. People who held a high status such as Dorothy never took the sacred Mallow Temple seriously from the start. This was why Stage 1 and Stage 2 of the Other Shore meant nothing to her. The Other Shore tokens that were usually discovered in these two stages were inferior. Here at the Other Shore's beginning stage, most people would just randomly choose Other Shore tokens and immediately challenge the higher stages. However, there were always exceptions. Some of these included the Heavenly Spider and the Heavenly Cobweb, which were rarely found in Stage 1 or Stage 2, but could be found in Stage 3. The situation they were currently in was quite bizarre. They were surprised to discover two glazed eyeballs within the dilapidated temple. Even Dorothy failed to confirm which stage of the Other Shore that pair belonged to. She was saddened upon knowing that she couldn't fuse with any of the glazed eyeballs. "You know, you can still take the demonic eye even if you can't fuse with it," Zen assured her. Dorothy shook her head and replied, "Giving it to me would be useless. You could sell it in exchange for soul pills. I'll fuse with the Heavenly Cobweb instead." The Heavenly Cobweb was a perfect fit for the truth of eternal sword intent. Dorothy practiced the origin swordsmanship. This was divided into 3 key areas, and one of those displayed how to master the art of stalling opponents. Fusing with the Heavenly Cobweb would enhance this key area of her practice, making it the perfect match. "I disagree," Zen interjected. "We explored the sacred Mallow Temple together, so it's only fair that we split what we've discovered equally. Even if you can't fuse with it, I insist you take it." But Dorothy wouldn't budge. Instead, she smiled and replied, "It's a pity that you've only practiced the truth of eternal sword intent other than the truth of cultivation nature. If you'd cultivated another truth of godly way, you could have fused with both the eyes." "A person can own 2 Other Shore tokens at the same time?" Zen asked curiously. "Not just 2. Some of the Oneness Sky Palace's warriors can even possess 3 or 4 Other Shore tokens. One more truth of godly way, one more Other Shore token," Dorothy explained. Most of the Source World's top-level masters would often cultivate the truths of godly ways according to their own needs, and they often possessed more than one Other Shore token. Everyone was endowed with a truth of godly way that was most suitable for them, and the Other Shore token that fitted the truth of godly way the most would serve as the main basis of their power and status. The remaining Other Shore tokens served as its supplements. "I see, so that means I can fuse with another Other Shore token as well," Zen murmured. Dorothy nodded with a smile and replied, "Of course you can. So if possessing an extra Other Shore token enables one to have another Thurgy and force of more divine megatons, why is everyone in Dragon City limiting themselves to just cultivate a single truth of godly way?" A puzzled Zen inquired. "Not everyone possesses your ability to comprehend another truth of godly way in such a short period of time." Dorothy added with a blink of her eyes, "They will be able to choose a second and third truth of godly way once they attain a higher cultivation level." These words further encouraged Zen to cultivate the truth of goodwill and malice. Back in the debate venue, Zen was given the heritage of Harper along with the truth of goodwill and malice. But ever since then, he hadn't placed much focus into further understanding and practicing with the latter. Zen's compatibility degree with the truth of goodwill and malice was not as good as that with the truth of eternal sword intent, but it was better than that with the truth of cultivation nature. It shouldn't be too difficult for him to master the truth of goodwill and malice. Just as Zen and Dorothy were about to go down so she could fuse with the Heavenly Cobweb, he noticed a small crack on the wall. The wall was directly aligned with the 2 glazed eyeballs and the soul crystal. Zen noticed the little black eyeballs had just moved towards this direction. Could it be that their target wasn't the two glazed eyeballs but whatever was hiding behind the crack on the wall? Whatever the case, Zen knew he wouldn't be able to destroy the temple with his soul of light. He decided that he'd return to the temple after his body reached the other shore. He felt that the whole thing was not as simple as what number 9527 had told him. The sacred Mallow temple had been destroyed and the dreaded eye demons had disappeared for so many years. Strangely enough, a few of them had suddenly revived. Once they finished putting the heavenly spider's body away, they returned to the first floor. Dorothy had successfully managed to activate her truth of godly way to fuse with the heavenly cobweb. Their first trip to the other shore came to an end. Upon leaving the sacred Mallow temple, they parted from the other shore. The sky had already lightened up and most of the people had stopped cultivating once Zen woke up. Tam, someone shouted. Wake up. One of Monica's followers remained seated in an upright position. Someone beside him called his name, but to no avail. Tam Hong fell to the ground, unconscious. Monica frowned and immediately rushed to his side to check on him. After her inspection, her expression darkened. Tam is dead, she confirmed. He had wandered in the 9th line of the Sea of Truth. I suspect he failed to reach the other shore last night. Upon seeing Tam Hong's corpse on the ground, Zen drew closer to it and shook his head. The stormy waves of the Sea of Truth were quite unruly and many people died. Once one's soul of light was devoured by the Sea of Truth, a soulless body would be left behind. Those who tried to reach the other shore were passing through the gates of torture. Many people like Tam Hong never woke up. It wasn't a rare occurrence to see such a thing in the Dragon City or at other cultivating areas. Once Monica asked her men to take Tam Hong away, she fixed her eyes on Zen and asked, "Did you make it to the other shore?" Zen had been in the Dragon City for less than a year. He surprised many people with his cultivation progress. Now, he had successfully gone to and returned from the other shore, a truly amazing feat. As Monica recalled the time when she was stuck at the 9th line of the Sea of Truth, she couldn't help but sigh and wonder why she had been dealt with such an unfair fate. Yes, I reached the other shore last night, Zen replied. Our flag master has reached the other shore. Our flag master has finally become an other shore realm warrior. Fegan, Belden, and the others also noticed the progress Zen had achieved. Although other shore realm warriors weren't rare, seeing Zen become one made them all excited and proud. In their eyes, he was truly special. Not only did you make it to the other shore, but your soul of light seems to have undergone great changes as well, Monica pointed out to Zen as she stared at him. His soul force had steadily grown over the past few months at a normal rate. Anyone who stayed on the Sea of Truth every day would have been able to grow their souls of light unwaveringly. Zen's soul of light, however, grew at an astonishing rate this time that made even Monica question her own power and think that he had surpassed her. He has just entered the other shore. How did he make it? She thought to herself. Good luck was on my side, Zen replied in an indifferent tone as if talking about the weather. I found something useful in stage 1. Something useful, Monica let his words hang on her tongue. What useful thing had provided Zen the chance to grow his soul of light at such a rate? That could only mean one thing, he had discovered the soul crystal. But why would such a precious crystal appear in stage 1 of the other shore? And even if it did appear, the soul crystal wouldn't have had much energy. Monica continued to ponder over this. Chapter 2669, Test. In the Dragon City, on this day, many stood before the red stone used for testing. Last night, more than 10 warriors from outside the Dragon City had reached the other shore. After they had merged with their other shore tokens for the first time, everyone was on edge, desperate to put their strength to the test. A woman with long hair approached the red stone. The crowd grew still, watching in anticipation. A small seed then appeared on her head. It's the spiritual fire seed. She is so lucky to have gotten the spiritual fire seed. It's so difficult to dig and find one. It's highly likely that someone helped her to get it. Everyone gathered around had a comment to make and all were green with envy of the long-haired woman. The woman held a short cyan sword in her hand. As she raised the short sword, the spiritual fire seed began to glow. Just then, a flame ignited on her short sword. Go! The woman charged at the red stone with vigor and her short sword slashed out ahead of her. Bang! She struck the red stone with her sword, using all her strength, which was absorbed by the stone. Soon after the blow, the red stone flashed and a strange pattern began forming in the middle. The pattern was the word, 3. The result had been revealed to an impressed and cheering crowd. That's what I expected. The force of the spiritual fire seed is less than 3 divine megatons. but combined with the woman's cultivation base, it is almost at that level. It's a good start for a warrior who has only just reached the other shore realm. The crowd continued with their judgment from the sidelines. The woman was clearly satisfied with her result. She put away her short sword, took a step back, and stood in front of a tall man. The large flag he carried showed him to quite clearly be a flag master. Zen was not interested in her result, as he had seen what he needed to. This woman had just reached the other shore realm. It was obvious that she was not a flag master, yet she was able to enter and leave Dragon City freely. It seemed the requirements for free entry and exit of the Dragon City were not as tough as he had imagined. He did not know how Gant went in and out without a flag. He thought he should ask him. Once the woman had gone, another man walked up to the stone, ready for his turn. The other shore token the man had fused with was the most common one, the Heavenly Cyan Stone. It could be found on the beach of the other shore. Of course, the man's result was not all that impressive. Although he threw all he had into his attack on the red stone, only one appeared on it. This meant his force was less than 2 divine megatons. The man still walked away, very satisfied. After all, he had finally set foot on the other shore. Fusing with the Heavenly Cyan Stone was just the first step, and next time he could obtain a better, more powerful other shore token. The next few warriors who stepped up possessed ordinary other shore tokens, including the Heavenly Cyan Stone, the Angelica Diurica, and so on. Most of their forces were revealed to be 1 or 2 divine megatons, hardly an impressive feat. Then came a handsome man with a very special other shore token, a shiny crystal. Zen heard murmurs around him that this was the magic cloud crystal. This man relied heavily on this magic cloud crystal to erupt a formidable force of 4 divine megatons. He was from a large clan in the Bloom Divine Province, and his clan was as powerful as Gant's. He appeared to have a close connection with the Oneness Sky Palace as many flag masters walked up to congratulate him. After almost all had taken their turns at the red stone, Zen decided it was time for him to give it a try. He didn't really want to show his talent here, but there was only 1 red stone for the test in the Dragon City, and so he had no choice. When Zen appeared, all eyes were focused on him. He is the guy who is against Galen. Hush. He has a strong background. Even though he has offended Galen, Galen hasn't dared to say anything back. I don't think Galen will tolerate being bullied like that. He moved quite fast in crossing the sea to reach the other shore. Zen walked towards the red stone slowly and focused. With a flick of his finger, the snow sword was in his hand, before anyone even knew what happened. When the flag masters who were familiar with the snow sword saw it, their eyes widened in astonishment. It's the snow sword from the best swords shop. He's bought the sword. How rich he is. Many flag masters wished they could own the swords from the best swords shop, but those profound blood treasures were extremely expensive. Chief among them was the snow sword, a premium profound blood treasure. The flag masters could not afford this, and only the alliance chiefs could. A buzz rang out as the crowd stared at Zen. As Zen summoned his strength, an icy light flashed from his blade. He had bought the sword not long ago, but he had already used it in the sword tower many times, and developed a great skill in handling it. This was a high-quality sword with almost no weakness. It was sure to produce something amazing at the hands of a skilled master. Zen then began to try to make use of the other shore token. He didn't hold the other shore token to his head like the others. When the demonic eye flashed a red light, Zen deliberately closed his right eye, completely covering the red light. He began pulling out the strength within the other shore token. A surge of power flowed around his body. This power was not as pure as that of the 9 divine stars in his inner world, as the stars' power belonged entirely to him. Although the other shore token to some extent belonged to him as well, it had come from elsewhere and was only being used by Zen for the time being. The momentum is so powerful. Has he really only just reached the other shore realm? I would say his soul momentum alone is comparable to that of the warriors in the 2nd or 3rd stage of the other shore realm. On feeling the aura that erupted from Zen, the crowd looked on expectantly. Some were confused. Zen seemed unwilling to reveal his other shore token. What was he hiding? While they were all left stunned and guessing, Zen had already lifted and swung the snow sword at the red stone, so fast that anyone had no time to see. Boom! He struck the stone with a thunderous bang. A trace of red light was left on the blade of the snow sword, being the evidence of the speed and power of the swing. When the red light had flashed, all those gathered around felt their minds shaken and they were even forced into taking a step back. Well, I didn't control that too well. Zen mumbled to himself. He'd been very careful when he made use of the power of the other shore token. However, he made a mistake when he used it for the first time. The red light was still released from the demonic eye. Everyone was blown away, standing still with their eyes glazing over in bewilderment when the red stone slowly revealed one large word. 19. Zen remained calm upon having his result revealed. He hadn't even used his own strength or released the way's blending energy. If Zen had used the 9 flashlight splitting swordsmanship as well as the 3 annihilation strike, or even the 6 annihilation strike, the result could have been much, much higher. But this time, he just wanted to test the power of the demonic eye and nothing else. Even then, he hadn't used up all the strength of the demonic eye. He'd only used half, and this was enough to leave everyone looking at the result in front of them in disbelief. They could not comprehend and accept it. How had someone pulled this off? Whether they could accept it or not, the result still remained on the red stone. It was the unmistakable proof of what just happened. 19 divine megatons. It's remarkable enough to be comparable to the other shore token of stage 3. What on earth is his other shore token? The crowd's incredulity could not cease. Chapter 2670, Some Serious Injuries. After a warrior reached the other shore, they would meet with the stage 1. Everything regarding stage 1 had somewhat become general knowledge among the people. Everyone was aware of how many divine megaton of force contained in the crimson golden sand, the heavenly cyan stone, and basically, any other shore token. One would be considered lucky if they were to stumble upon one of the rarer ones, like the spiritual fire seed. However, there was a limit to the amount of force within these other shore tokens, which ranged from 1 divine megaton to 4. All things considered, the most highly regarded other shore token in stage 1 was the magic cloud crystal they had witnessed just now. As this token was extremely rare, it was not normal to encounter it in stage 1. However, Zen's sword strike had a power that surpassed warriors in even the 3rd stage of the other shore realm. All this information buzzed around the heads of all who witnessed this feat. Naturally, a sense of awe filled them. What other shore token had this guy obtained? Just as Zen turned around to take his leave, the handsome man stopped him. Hello, friend, you are also a beginner at the other shore realm, right? What other shore token have you obtained? Normally, discussing other shore tokens was taboo for most people. Unless one was willing to boast their tokens in front of others, it was considered indecent to ask someone about it so frankly. This etiquette was displayed when Monica kept quiet when she found out that Zen had already made it to the other shore realm, not daring to ask him about his other shore token. This question should be hard for me to answer, shouldn't it? Zen gazed at the man coldly, smiling mirthlessly. The handsome man was taken aback for a moment, but the corners of his lips twitched upwards in a forced smile. Allow me to introduce myself. He cleared his throat. I am Normand of the Chu clan from the West Vanity Lake. If you don't mind, we can explore the other shore together. The Chu clan was popular in the West Vanity Lake. Normand smirked, thinking Zen would be shocked to find out his identity. However, Zen just smiled at him nonchalantly, replying, if there is a chance, then, sure. Zen then abruptly turned around and left without waiting for a response. Normand was flabbergasted at Zen's perfunctory response. Few people reacted this way whenever he revealed his identity. Either he comes from an even more prominent clan, or this guy is just reckless. Normand huffed in frustration. Watching Zen leave, Normand's expression darkened. It only took Zen half a day to take the test before the red stone. Upon completing this, he headed for the sword tower. Zen found sellers stationed there. Is there any place here that's quiet enough for me to cultivate? While the sword tower was indeed a place for cultivation, it mainly served swordsmanship thurgies. However, Zen was hoping to cultivate the truth of goodwill and malice, consequently, he needed a place of solitude. This was actually quite difficult to find inside and outside the Dragon City. This is because silver swords rained from the sky, creating a sort of organized chaos. While this might be beneficial for practicing the truth of eternal sword intent, it was quite distracting for those who practiced other truths of godly ways. You want a secluded cultivation room? Sellers raised an eyebrow, evidently taken aback by Zen's request. However, he recalled how Athamar had asked him to take special care of Zen. Technically, it was not difficult for him to grant Zen's request, he only needed to remove the sword arrays from the cultivation room. After a slight moment of hesitation, he eventually agreed to Zen's request. After settling down, Zen began to wonder how good his compatibility was with the truth of goodwill and malice. He figured it should be higher than that of the truth of cultivation nature, and that this should be a bit easier. Either way, neither of these were comparable to the truth of eternal sword intent, which was what he was most comfortable with. Glancing around the cultivation room, Zen sighed. It was a pity that there were no items that would help him cultivate. Now, he would have to rely solely on his understanding of the truth of godly way in order to make any progress. However, the process would be extremely slow. For 3 consecutive days, he stayed cooped up in the room, reciting the truth of goodwill and malice over and over again. The power of goodwill and malice manifested alternatively, which affected Zen's aura. Sometimes he resembled a holy Buddha, holding up one hand. Other times, his expression would darken with mischief, as though he were possessed by a devil. After 3 days, Zen finished his secluded cultivation. Without dilly-dallying, he left the sword tower. The minute he stepped out of the room, Sellers sensed the truth of godly way emanating from Zen's body. Has he been spending these days practicing with the purpose of grasping his second truth of godly way? He wondered. Of course, he was mistaken. If he had been more powerful, Sellers would have sensed that Zen was not practicing the second truth of godly way, but the third. Without further delay, Zen made his way to the exit of Dragon City. As soon as Zen set foot at the market outside the city, he felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Something was definitely wrong. In the distance, he saw Kenelm, Jago, and the others. Running towards them, he noticed a heavy scent in the air. It was the smell of blood. Belden, Fegan, what happened to you? Zen cried, his eyes widening in astonishment once he saw the 2 figures lying in a pool of blood on the ground. Fegan had lost an arm and a leg, while half of Belden's body had been cut off. A bitter taste filled Zen's mouth as he took in this gruesome scene. Flagmaster is back now. The instant the disciples of Swordlight Palace saw Zen, their hearts were filled with joy, their eyes, with hope. Zen said nothing. Instead, he knelt down beside the massacred figures and stretched out his hand towards them. Shutting his eyes in concentration, he released his spiritual sense to assess the gravity of their injuries. Thankfully, both of them just passed out. Their souls were still intact, and their inner worlds were not destroyed. Zen heaved a sigh of relief, but his expression darkened. Who did this? He asked quietly. I suppose it was Fergus's men, Gant replied nervously, shuffling from one foot to the other. And why didn't you stop them? Zen bared his teeth at the poor man, unable to contain his anger. Gant raised his hands helplessly. I tried, but I was no match for them. I even got injured, too. Over the past few months, Gant had become somewhat of a loyal member under Zen. He was tasked with recruiting new members, and at the same time, he helped the other members find what they needed whenever he entered the city. Whenever Zen was in the Dragon City, Gant was almost regarded as a deputy flag master who dealt with the more trivial matters for Zen. Because Gant was somewhat like second in command, naturally, Zen would turn to him for an explanation. Zen shot Gant an angry glare before pulling out 2 pills from his space ring. He gently fed the pills to the 2 severely injured people lying on the ground, and watched intently as the pills worked their magic. Suddenly, Belden's and Fegan's wounds began to bubble as new flesh magically started to form. With a low hiss, muscle fibers began weaving together, healing their wounds quickly and producing new limbs. How did this happen? Tell me the details, Zen barked. Gant then began to explain the sequence of events. Annually, newcomers flocked to the Dragon City in between winter and spring. Many would try to cross the sword wall at this time, thus, the demand for sword-reading liquid would skyrocket at this time of year. Usually, the price of the sword-reading liquid would increase by 30%, or even more. However, for some reason, the price didn't rise this year, in fact, it even dropped. Now, it was only about 10,000 divine crystals per bottle. The old sellers scratched their heads at this predicament, and decided to investigate the matter. Not long after, they found out the reason. There was a new seller of sword-reading liquid right outside Dragon City. There was absolutely no way they would tolerate such a thing. Consequently, they recruited a team of hatchet men to cause trouble for this new seller. On the other side of the coin, Belden and Fegan had concentrated on purchasing heavenly pure liquid and selling sword-reading liquid, minding and running their own business. Although Belden had taken measures to keep a low profile, the other sellers still managed to find him. Unprepared for the sudden attack launched by his competitors, he was no match for them at all. Fortunately, their enemies had decided to spare their lives, albeit barely. Even Gant, who had attempted to rescue them, had come out of it slightly injured. Chapter 2671, Revenge. Most importantly, they've destroyed more than 40 bottles of the sword-reading liquid. As Gant said this, his distress showed all over his face. One bottle of the sword-reading liquid was worth 15,000 divine crystals. Over 40 bottles could be sold more than 600,000 divine crystals. This was a loss that was hard to swallow. But Zen cared little about the sword-reading liquid. As long as he could acquire the heavenly pure liquid, he could make as much sword-reading liquid as he wanted. What bothered him was that Belden and Fagin were beaten black and blue. He had to do something about this. Who is this Fergus? Zen asked coldly, filled with rage. Just as Gant was about to answer, another voice chimed in, he's an alliance chief in the Dragon City. It came from Monica. She rushed over as fast as she could when she heard about the accident. She swept through Belden and Fagin with her spiritual sense while she answered Zen. When she found the two of them were not seriously injured, she breathed a huge sigh of relief. An alliance chief. An icy look flashed through Zen's eyes. Zen, just forget about it. He comes from a powerful lineage. It would be better to not provoke him, suggested Monica. If Fergus was only an ordinary alliance chief, Monica wouldn't stop Zen, but that was not the case. Although those supporting Zen did not reveal all their strength, Monica knew that very few in the Dragon City could challenge Zen. Fergus was an alliance chief, but he was not able to make the sword-reading liquid. He was just a glorified salesman, bringing it down from the Oneness Sky Palace to sell for its maker. Who was this from above capable of making the sword-reading liquid? Someone who was capable of instant enlightenment. Such a person would have a region under their control, a bright future ahead of them, be a true powerhouse. It would be unwise to offend them. I don't care, Zen sneered. He looked at Gant and asked, where do they sell the sword-reading liquid? Take me there, now. All the sword-reading liquid was transported from the market to outside the sword wall. This was also Fergus' mode of business. Flag Master, are you really going to? Gant stammered nervously, trying to stop Zen. Take me there, Zen ordered in a tone that allowed no response. Now that he was a flag master and the disciples were his subordinates, it was his duty to avenge those below him who had been wronged and hurt. Right from the start, Gant had warned the disciples to control their tempers towards Fergus, or they'd leave Zen in a dilemma as he now was. Heeding his words, Kinelm, Jago and Elgin had suppressed their anger. They feared Zen would be a victim of revenge after enacting his own for them. After all, this was Fergus' territory and Zen's foundation here was too shallow to make him strong here. However, Zen's mind was made up and this somehow got everyone excited. I'll take you there, Zen, let's go, I know where they are. The disciples began escorting Zen to the market. Monica saw she could do nothing more now and so gritted her teeth and said, it seems like we're about to have quite an eventful day. Gant shrugged his shoulders and said, you've read my mind. Couldn't you turn to Master Walter for help? Walter Tong was one of the 3 top alliance chiefs in the Dragon City. Monica achieved her current status with the help of Walter. Even if Master Walter were to step in, it would be of no use. Fergus will still do as he pleases, Monica sighed, shaking her head woefully. With his powerful background, Fergus was considered special in the Dragon City. Even those alliance chiefs whose strength was far above his own didn't dare to provoke him. Therefore, Walter would not be able to solve the problem either. We might as well go with them, said Gant, shrugging his shoulders. The two of them followed behind the group. The group passed through the market aggressively, attracting a lot of attention as they went by. But when the others figured out their cultivation levels, disdain appeared on their faces. They are sword-reading liquid sellers. They competed with Fergus for business and paid the price today. Don't they know that only Fergus can sell the sword-reading liquid here? It seems that they are here for revenge. Look at their flag master. He's only reached the other shore realm. He's too weak to take revenge on Fergus' men. He's just courting death. Everyone in the market seemed to assume they knew the result of what was about to happen. It was boring to cultivate in the Dragon City. Those in the market saw this as good entertainment. Some even closed their stores to follow behind the group as well. After passing 2 streets, Kinelm pointed to a place close by and said, right there. Fergus, large stall occupied almost half the street. Many people bought the sword-reading liquid here and sold it outside the sword wall. Fergus had set the price of the sword-reading liquid at 20,000 divine crystals, without any discount, so the resellers made small profits. Since Zen began selling the sword-reading liquid at a much lower price, Fergus' business had gone down. The resellers could make much higher profits if they bought from Zen and then sold it outside the wall. Because of this, many well-informed people had begun to purchase the sword-reading liquid from Zen. To ensure they continued to earn handsomely, they kept these dealings a secret. Thanks to that, Zen had been selling for a few months before Fergus got word of it. Zen stood poised in front of the shop and glanced over it unimpressed. Nothing here gave him any cause for the fear he was told he should have. As an alliance chief, Fergus didn't manage the shop himself. He had sent 3 flag masters to help him take care of it. One of them now lazed behind the counter. When he saw Zen and the others marching on the store, he knew exactly who they were and why they had come. He and the other two flag masters had taught the group a little lesson. Fergus had ordered them not to kill anyone, or the group would not have survived. The flag master was curious about their arrival. He didn't think they would dare to come here. Surely they understood the danger they faced. Why had they come? Were they here to beg for mercy? Hey, you! Zen had already made his move as soon as the flag master opened his mouth. He didn't even have time to finish his words. Rumble, crash. Under the impact of the immense force, the shop which once covered an area of 20 to 30 feet collapsed from left to right with a monstrous bang, and turned into nothing more than a heap of debris. Everything inside was expensive, including over 100 bottles of sword-reading liquid. The sword-reading liquid was worth many, many divine crystals. Fergus did not have the ability to make the sword-reading liquid as Zen did. He would have to pay for all those bottles. He had just lost over 1 million divine crystals with his shop's collapse. The face of the flag master standing in the ruins turned pale. He hadn't been prepared for Zen to actually take action, believing that Zen did not possess the strength to do it. Even now, he was still more afraid of how Fergus would react than of Zen. You mongrel, don't blame me for what happens next. The flag master gritted his teeth and grimaced as if he was going to eat Zen alive. Zen ignored him and turned back to ask, did he beat you today? Kenom nodded in confirmation. Zen turned around, with the snow sword in hand. At the same time, in a terrifying tone he said, today, you have only done one thing right. And it's a cause for celebration. With that, the snow sword shone, and the icy white gleam spread, like thousands of snowflakes engulfing the world. Chapter 2672, Worry. The flag master was preoccupied, wondering what Zen's words meant, when suddenly a piercing bright light interrupted his thoughts. Instinctively, he instantly raised his hand, summoning a long sword to parry Zen's attack. After all, he was a warrior at the second stage of the other shore realm, and had been training in the Dragon City for a long time. Fergus entrusting him with guarding the store indicated he was a force to be reckoned with. Ding, ding, ding. Dragon snake dancing swordsmanship. The long sword in the flag master's hand writhed and coiled around his body, protecting him from the scattered sword radiance from Zen. The flag master's expression grew serious. He had summoned his strongest swordsmanship, and yet, he could feel that it was only a matter of time before Zen's fragmented sword radiance would pierce his defenses. He gritted his teeth, arms trembling with every blow. Why is he so powerful? He winced at another powerful blow. He has just reached the first stage of the other shore realm. Will you be able to defend yourself? Zen's eyes flashed coldly, his sword radiance shooting towards the flag master unrelentingly. The flag master struggled to resist, beads of sweat streaming down his face. He knew he was at his limit. His eyes darted around, desperately looking for a solution to this mess. Bang! It was too late. The sword exploded into tiny fragments, scattered into the wind. Puff, puff, the white sword radiance pierced his body. He barely had the time to react. Before he knew it, an arm and a leg were torn clean off his body. The flag master locked eyes with Zen in shocked awe before he collapsed to the ground. How could he, a flag master at the second stage of the other shore realm, not even last 5 minutes in a battle with this Zen? The flag master bit back tears. I'm going to die here, he thought miserably, as Zen slowly approached his pitiful figure. However, to his surprise, Zen walked past him, as though he didn't even notice the injured figure bleeding on the ground. Did he let me go? The flag master gasped, unable to keep the tears from streaming down his face. Only then did he remember what Zen had said. It was true that he didn't kill the 2 men today. Zen had spared his life, although leaving him severely injured. When he pondered over this, he felt a sense of gratitude well up from within him. How dare you destroy our Master Fergus' store? Brat, you're courting death. 2 other flag masters roared from the other side of the street, shaking their fists. Immediately, they drew their swords and charged towards Zen, their eyes red from rage. As he saw the 2 men approaching, Zen's expression remained stoic. A white light flashed on the snow sword. The previously messy sword radiance had obviously changed. It had just been slow and dispersed, but now it was quick and converging. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Puff, puff, boom, plop. Before the 2 flag masters could even reach Zen, they collapsed in the middle of the street. Monica gasped slightly, unable to contain her shock. The 3 flag masters were by no means weak. Although Monica was confident that she could take on at least one of them, there was no possible way that she'd be able to fight all 3 at once. However, against Zen, these 3 flag masters fell before him, one by one. This guy has just broken through to the other shore realm. It was undeniable that some gaps couldn't be narrowed in time. Monica scratched her forehead, deep in thought. She had noticed that the sword Thurgy Zen used was the 9 flashlight splitting swordsmanship. Monica knew this because she was the one who accompanied Zen when he bought it, which happened fairly recently. How could Zen use this swordsmanship so expertly and powerfully if he had only cultivated it for a short period of time? Meanwhile, a silence had fallen over the market, as everyone was stunned by Zen's power. Many had gathered to watch, curious as to how Zen would resolve this matter. Little did they know that Zen would unleash this much power on those poor 3 flag masters. Nobody dared utter a word, fearful that Zen might turn against them in his rage. They just quietly watched the injured bodies writhe in blood on the pavement. Just who was this guy? Everyone wondered. Although they had witnessed Zen's power, they couldn't help being worried about him. Fergus was a force to be reckoned with. How was Zen going to clean up this mess? How would Fergus deal with him? No matter he could take it or not, Zen had helped those disciples of Swordlight Palace vent their frustration. The sword-reading liquid was not only owned by Fergus' store. Since their flag master could make it, then there was no reason to forbid them from selling it. It was too domineering for them to hurt these disciples. Gant too was struck with a mix of shock and awe. He realized that everything Zen told him in the sword tower was not just empty boasts. Yet, he was still filled with worry. The one who intimidated him was not Fergus, but the person commanding him. Go back and tell your alliance chief to come to me if you have any problems. If you attack my people again, I won't go easy next time. Zen gave one last satisfied look at the scene, then turned and left with Kennelm and the others. Upon Zen's exit, life gradually began to return to the quiet marketplace. The 3 flag masters who were writhing on the ground moaned for help. The people immediately rushed to them, bringing medicines and bandages. Others began to whisper amongst themselves, discussing feverishly what they had just witnessed. Meanwhile, in the Phoenix restaurant of the Dragon City, several women twirled and threw their heads back, their heavy locks bouncing with every movement. With seductive smiles, these sirens sang to the audience sweetly. Among the audience were some alliance chiefs. One of them had a small jade token hanging from his belt. Upon a closer look, one would see the oneness symbol engraved on it. It was the oneness token gifted to every oneness guard. Everyone who came to the Dragon City dreamt of earning this small jade token. Congratulations, Yoan, someone bellowed with hearty laughter. Finally, you've been promoted to a oneness guard. And through only one assessment. Your life here in the Dragon City is coming to an end. Ah. Fergus trailed off sentimentally. Holding a glass of wine in one hand, Fergus offered a toast to Yoan. Yoan smiled modestly. Becoming the oneness guard is but the beginning of my hardship. Unrest broke out again in the mountain viewing province. Last month, 100 oneness guards lost their lives while trying to keep the peace. If these riots continue, I'm afraid all the newly promoted oneness guards will die, too. Although the Oneness Sky Palace was considered a prosperous force, it still faced a lot of pressure in the Bloom Divine Province. After I leave, Yoan suddenly said seriously, could you please take care of my old friend? He gestured at an elderly man, who sat next to him, Galen. Yoan was planning to leave the rest of his merit points to Galen once he left the Dragon City. This way, Galen could replace him and be appointed the new alliance chief. Galen, who was usually a sour-faced character, quickly smiled and held up his glass of wine. I would appreciate your help in the future, he said modestly, toasting with the alliance chiefs. When it came to Fergus, Galen's tone softened as he tried to emulate more humility. I would greatly appreciate your help, Master Fergus. Galen could care less about the other alliance chiefs. Fergus, however, came from a prominent background. He was sure that befriending such an alliance chief would prove beneficial to him in the future. However, before their glasses could clink, a person came rushing over to Fergus. Out of breath and panting, the messenger could barely spit out the words, Master Fergus. I have news. What happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Fergus asked anxiously, his brows furrowing. Master Fergus, someone smashed our store outside the Dragon City. He gasped for breath. He even destroyed about 100 bottles of sword-reading liquid. The man shuddered as though he were remembering something gruesome. What? Who did it? Fergus demanded. He felt a chill run down his spine, extending to his arms and flowing to his fingertips. The glass of wine he was holding frosted over, the wine turning into ice pellets. The women who had been singing and dancing suddenly stopped and shivered slightly. His name, the messenger replied, eyes widening in fear, is Zen Luo? The alliance chiefs exchanged confused glances, wondering, who is Zen Luo? Fergus scratched his chin. He had never heard of this name before. Just as he was wondering why such a nobody would dare smash his store, Galen snorted. I was wondering who would have the gall to oppose you. It's Zen again. Chapter 2673, Idiot Off. Fergus swung his gaze to Galen, eyes narrowed as he asked, do you know this brat? Of course I do, Galen said, his eyes becoming hard and cold. He's a new flag master. He had yet to even reach the other shore realm when he passed the sword wall. He slaughtered my family under the sword wall. His voice had become a low growl. Truly, Fergus wasn't sure if he felt the urge to laugh or cry at the news that Zen was just a mere flag master. Usually, in cases such as this, a nobody like him would already be dead. Why then is he still living? Master Fergus, you don't understand. I have tried to find the perfect opportunity to kill him, but that day he was accompanied by a woman. Where she comes from or who she is, I don't know, but she seems to have some special background. The owner of the Truth Library even assisted her. On top of that, I was warned by the Dragon City's lead guard, Galen groused, a scowl firmly in place. After that particular incident, he had decided not to take any action against Zen. He didn't fear Zen, not at all, but he was wary of that woman. He knew better than to offend her in any way and risk her rage. And what is so special about this woman? Fergus questioned with a single brow raised. Galen felt his heart stutter in his chest, and he just barely refrained from rubbing it to help alleviate the discomfort. He might be afraid of the woman, but Fergus was different. The man had lived in the Dragon City for many years, and had refused the entrance test of oneness guards each time. He'd only been here to handle the sword-reading liquid business for someone in the Oneness Sky Palace. It was common knowledge of how powerful one had to be to craft the sword-reading liquid. No matter how powerful an alliance chief believed themselves to be, they wouldn't dare to speak or act arrogantly in front of Fergus. Everyone within the Dragon City walked on eggshells around the man. Zen would not stand a chance against Fergus, Galen was sure. Galen spoke once more to Fergus. No matter the woman's identity and what she can do, she cannot compare to you, Master Fergus. This one called Zen is particularly hateful. Fergus glanced at Galen and said indifferently, do not try to woo your way into me dealing with the little cretin. All the alliance chiefs were cunning and quick-witted. It was easy for them to see the hidden intent behind Galen's words. He wished to kill Zen with a borrowed blade. Galen huffed a laugh. I apologize, Master Fergus. It's just that I want this brat killed, but I am unable to do so. The others were surprised at his honesty. Fergus showed no reaction to the statement. I'm in a terrible mood today, Yoan. Let us call it a day. He turned to walk away, but cast a quick glance over his shoulder. I will relieve Zen of his life before night falls. If you would lead the way, Galen. When night began to blanket the Dragon City, the wilderness became teeming with people. Among the people, the flag masters were preparing and searching for the best places to position the flagpoles. At the same time as the preparations, Belden and Fagin were slowly waking up, the wounds on their bodies healed. Nothing but a subtle soreness ailed them now. They listened intently to what had happened, and when Belden learned Zen had avenged them, he couldn't help the worry that flitted across his face. Belden was a naturally cautious man. When he had begun to sell the sword-reading liquid, he knew there would be conflicts with the other sellers, so he had to inquire about them secretly. He was fully aware that Fergus was not a man to be trifled with, and that Zen should stay clear of him. If he hadn't been unconscious, he would have attempted to stop Zen from avenging them. However, he did not expect to wake up and learn that Zen had already destroyed Fergus' shop. Flagmaster, you were much too reckless this time. Of course, he was moved by what Zen had done, but the consequences of his actions were going to prove to be too steep. This would send Zen into the abyss. Fagin, though, did not care about the consequences. How could you say that? Our flagmaster did it for us. Besides, they needed to learn a valuable lesson, he said, nodding his head as if that was a fact. You know nothing, Belden replied harshly. Assessing Belden's worried expression, Zen simply smiled. Do not worry so, just rest. I know what I am doing. And besides, Fagin may not be that smart, but he's right. If we had made a concession, they would have bullied us further. Belden remained silent, trying not to let the worry consume him. Everything was lively and energized outside Zen's territory. They all knew that Fergus would not let the destruction of his shop go, and some people had a faint guess as to what would happen tonight. The setting sun seemed to be washed in crimson, drawing out the hulking shadow of the Dragon City. Shrouded in the shadow, a group of more than 10 people could be seen leaving the city and flying into the wilderness. Galen could not believe the turn of events. He was elated. After sending away Yoan, he was able to become an alliance chief, and to top it all off, Fergus was going to kill Zen for him. Within the first few hundred miles of the wilderness, flagpoles were densely packed into the earth. Most of the people were already preparing for their cultivation once night fell. Their curiosity was piqued by Fergus, accompanied by other alliance chiefs, as they flew past them. Alliance chiefs can insert their flagpoles into the ground near the Dragon City, so why have they come so far out? Didn't you hear about what happened today? Whatever it is, someone is in a lot of trouble. Within the Dragon City, it was peaceful, and acts of violence were strictly prohibited. Out here in the wilderness though, the rules of the city did not apply. No one would bat an eye at murder out here. There, Galen said, directing Fergus' attention to the flag with Luo embroidered on it. That is where the brat should be. The corner of his lips curled into a vicious grin. Fat body shuttling through the air, it did not take long for Fergus to be over Zen's territory. Who is Zen Luo? He shouted coldly. The voice drew Monica's attention, and she turned her face to the sky to see Fergus. Her heart sank into her stomach at the sight. The rumor that Fergus would seek revenge for the smallest grievance proved to be true. Her gaze traveled to the man standing beside Fergus. It was Walter. A thought occurred to her and she rushed forward before Zen could get to them. It was not until Monica followed Walter that she got her current status. She wanted to ask Walter to put in a good word for Zen. She said, "Alliance Chief Walter, this is probably a misunderstanding. Zen is a newcomer. He doesn't know about the rules." Her boldness embarrassed Walter. He knew that nothing would convince Fergus to be rid of his anger and turn away, and he knew if he suggested anything, he would offend him. So he acted as if he hadn't heard Monica. "Who do you think you are to speak to us? Idiot off!" Fergus bellowed. An invisible force accompanied his voice and crashed into Monica, sending her to the ground as if under a massive weight. "Flagmaster Monica! Flagmaster!" Monica's followers cried out, horrified at the scene before them. As a Grand Flagmaster, she was not weak. Monica proved her strength by struggling to her feet, panting through the pain. "How are you still alive?" Fergus was shocked that this woman could withstand his attack. His knuckles cracked as he clenched his fist, and swung towards her. The invisible force came barreling towards her again, and she knew her body might get pulverized into dust this time. Before the attack made contact with her, a figure stepped up to her side. There was a muffled clang that rang throughout the sky. It seemed as if Fergus' attack had struck a steel wall. Zen couldn't help the slight smirk that shook the corner of his lips. It was easy to block the attack. Galen cursed silently in his head before pointing out to Fergus that the man was in fact Zen. Fergus sized up his opponent, a moment of surprise flickering in his eyes. "You are Zen, tell me, where did you get the sword-reading liquid?" Fergus wasn't just here to kill Zen. He needed to know the origin of the sword-reading liquid they had. He had helped someone sell the sword-reading liquid. One would assume he was quite rich, but the fact of the matter was, 99% of his income had fallen into that person's pocket. If there was a cheaper way to obtain sword-reading liquid, he wanted to know. Zen ignored the question for now, bending closer to Monica to make sure she was okay. The blow had not been too powerful, but still caused a lot of damage. Her bones were broken and her elixir field was messed up. He was just glad she had survived. He gently put a pill into her mouth before turning to Fergus with a cold glare. "You want to know where I got the sword-reading liquid?" He scoffed. "If you roll along the ground and make it to the entrance of the Dragon City, I'll tell you." Chapter 2674, Anger. Zen's words stunned everyone in the audience. When they heard Fergus ask Zen where he had gotten the sword-reading liquid, they thought that Fergus might let Zen go after knowing the answer. After all, it was not easy to get the sword-reading liquid. They guessed that maybe Zen was selling the sword-reading liquid for some big shot who had the perfect compatibility degree. If Fergus didn't want to offend the big shot behind Zen, he might not do anything to him and might even spare his life. That way, Zen would be truly lucky. But in reality, Zen was so bloody arrogant to the extent that he even tried to provoke Fergus. "Zen is digging his grave. There's no way Fergus would let him go." There would have been a small chance Fergus would have let him live, had he knelt down and begged for mercy at the beginning. But now there is no hope at all. What could we say? Zen's arrogance will lead to his death. These were some of the thoughts of the people there, but they could never say them out loud given that there was a group of alliance chiefs floating in the air above them. All of a sudden, a gust of chilling air spread out slowly. Fergus, slightly obese face turned as pale as a ghost. He used to be a short-tempered man, but the years he spent in the Dragon City had changed him a lot. He was so changed that he thought he was now an even-tempered man. However, he just realized that he was even-tempered because no one dared to anger him. A cold aura spread out, and even the several alliance chiefs retreated. They knew that Fergus was already furious, and they didn't want any part in this. "What did you say?" Fergus asked and suppressed the anger in his heart. "Are you deaf or what? Anyways, I repeat, if you roll along the ground and make it to the entrance of the Dragon City, I'll tell you. If you refuse, I will take that as a sign of not being sincere enough, so I'm not going to tell you," Zen said indifferently. "Ha ha ha," Fergus broke out into an angry laugh. "There are many ways to seek death, but I've never met someone seeking death like you are doing." "My pleasure. And I've never met a guy as arrogant as you," Zen said, shrugging his shoulders. At this moment, Galen approached Fergus and said, "Alliance Chief Fergus, I know this guy has a bitter tongue. Don't bother yourself talking to him anymore, and let me handle him." "Idiot off." With a loud smack, Fergus sent Galen flying backwards. Galen dropped to the ground heavily and landed into a flagmaster's territory. After sending Galen away, Fergus couldn't compose his anger any longer. He moved towards Zen like a lion heading to its prey. So he is using the might godly way, Zen thought. His eyes flashed when he saw Galen rushing down towards him. He also could not help but notice Fergus' astonishing strength. He assumed that he mainly cultivated the might godly way, and also used the force of his other shore token. When Fergus dived down, the pressure he released on Zen was surprisingly huge. After feeling that force, Zen's followers spread out in all directions. However, they still found it difficult to stabilize their bodies. Someone actually slumped onto the ground. The other flagmasters even removed the flagpoles they had inserted in the ground and moved to other places to insert their flagpoles again. But Zen still stood there, unmoved, like a statue declaring its territory. Is that guy so scared that he is petrified? A casual blow from Fergus will at least have the force of 10 divine megatons. I'm afraid he'll smash Zen to pieces. Let's disband in all directions. Just as everyone was wondering why Zen didn't move, Zen's and Fergus' bodies smashed with each other. Since ancient times, the Oneness Sky Palace disciples had been practicing swordsmanship only. Warriors like Zen and Fergus who used their brute force to fight were extremely rare. Of course, in the eyes of most people, this was not a battle. They only thought that it was Fergus' way of brutally killing Zen. Bang! They heard a muffled sound. A huge crater appeared, and in its center, the ground sunk more than 100 feet. No one could clearly see because of the clouds that the dust formed. Just as everyone was trying to explore it with their spiritual sense, a figure was thrown out of the dust and rolled about 7 or 8 times before stopping. The figure that came out of the crater shocked every single one. The expressions of the Alliance chiefs floating in the sky also changed drastically. Why? Because it was no one but Fergus. Not Zen, as they had all expected. This was a result that they could not imagine, even in their wildest dreams. Wow, our flag master is so powerful. He is actually able to fight against an alliance chief. I'm so proud. Zen has never let us down before. Those disciples of the Swordlight Palace were thrilled, and even Belden, who was supported by the other disciples, had a smile on his face. It seems that I was wrong. Our flag master didn't act impulsively. It's just that the speed by which he is improving is far beyond our imagination. Just 1 year ago, Zen was at the same cultivation level as them. At that time, he had no power to fight against a warrior at the other shore realm. But now, there was a huge gap between Zen and them. As for the other warriors, when they heard the words of the disciples from the Swordlight Palace, they just couldn't believe their ears. They didn't understand why these disciples were so confident in Zen. Normally, no flag master had the ability to fight against an alliance chief. Zen's slightly skinny figure slowly and arrogantly floated up from the dust. He strolled in the air as he indifferently looked at Fergus on the ground. If you don't take your opponent seriously, you will often end up like this. You're asking for more than you can chew, buddy. Fergus was very powerful, but he did not regard Zen as an opponent, so he did not even use any weapon. He only wanted to tear Zen with his sheer strength. To be fair, seeing that Fergus didn't use any weapon, Zen didn't use a weapon either. Since the might godly way was able to blend with the force of the other shore token, the moment Fergus rushed towards Zen, Zen had also gathered his strength source and the force of his other shore token to fight back. Actually, Fergus had a tough body that wasn't injured when he was thrown away by Zen. However, his fists trembled like never before and he was drowned in an unprecedented violent wave of depression. In his eyes, Zen was just nothing more than a fly that he could easily kill. Maybe even with a single punch. However, the power that Zen had displayed was completely beyond Fergus' expectations. Zen's force might have reached 20 divine megatons. How was this possible? It was utterly unreasonable. Your power, how did you make it? Fergus asked in a hesitant voice. There are some secrets that can only be told to the dead. Are you sure you still want to know? Zen calmly asked. Just like that, in about 30 seconds, the two of them seemed to have completely changed their status. Even the Alliance chiefs looked solemnly at Zen. When they saw his indifferent expression, their hearts skipped a beat. The whole thing was awkwardly weird. Zen had just reached the first stage of the other shore realm, and yet he had the force of 20 divine megatons. He had infinite potential. According to the rules of the Dragon City, he should have been sent to the Oneness Sky Palace already. In retrospect, it became obvious that Zen was sure to win against Fergus, or else he wouldn't have acted so calm all this time. Walter and the other Alliance chiefs exchanged looks and wanted to give Fergus a heads up. From the looks of it, Zen had obviously provoked Fergus on purpose just now, which meant that he probably had some other purpose. But Fergus was so angry at this moment that he wouldn't have listened to them. How arrogant you are, I just underestimated you. Fergus said. He was a proud man who had just been beaten by a mere flag master. This was sheer humiliation that he had to make up for. As he shouted, he stood up from the ground and stretched out his hands. A large white sword with broad blade appeared in front of him, out of the blue. Wild Snow Sword. As Gant saw the sword, his heart skipped a beat. This sword was also a premium profound blood treasure. This sword and the snow sword that Zen had bought were forged by the person Gant knew. He had no idea that the sword was bought by Fergus. After thinking for a while, he found that it made sense. The sword price was about 9 million divine crystals. Not every Alliance chief could afford to buy such an expensive sword, and since Fergus was probably one of the richest Alliance chiefs, this was a no-brainer. So you are finally going to take this fight seriously, huh? Zen taunted. When he sensed the constantly increasing aura from Fergus, his face revealed a trace of satisfaction. Chapter 2675, The Flow Strike. After half a year cultivating in the Dragon City, Zen wanted to test his own strength. Fergus coming here to challenge him was the perfect opportunity. Fergus held the Wild Snow Sword as his incomparably intense Truth Aura sword. At that moment, Zen saw a beast ready to attack. The aura that soared out of him had so much power and presence that many Alliance chiefs unconsciously trembled out of fear. I can't believe this. Fergus is actually getting serious. Yoan was taken aback as he felt the aura pervading from Fergus. Other Alliance chiefs reacted with equal disbelief. Yoan had always boasted throughout the Dragon City that he was the #1 Alliance chief. He had, in addition, obtained the recognition of the other Alliance chiefs. Walter and other Alliance chiefs were inferior to him. This time, Yoan had successfully passed the examination and became a Oneness Guard, a title which everyone exclaimed he was worthy of. If he had failed, no one else could pass. Meanwhile, others regarded Fergus as the weakest among the Alliance chiefs. Not many deemed him to be fearful enough. Only then did Yoan realize that he underestimated Fergus. Fergus has hidden his strength so well. Have you ever seen him fight before? Nobody in the Dragon City dares to offend him, so he never had the chance to see him at full strength. Plastered across the Alliance chiefs' faces were bitter smiles. Only now did they realize their mistake in underestimating Fergus. Zen looked grave as Fergus' aura kept soaring. He didn't know much about the Alliance chiefs, but he thought their cultivation was similar to that of one-star Oneness Guards. The Oneness Sky Palace was a force as influential as the Bering race, so Zen assumed that Fergus was on par with one-star Yellow Emperor Guards. In terms of strength, he would be just like Hamish and Xavier. The aura that he saw from Fergus now was beyond his expectations. Since you are provoking me deliberately, then I'll do what you want. Fergus was not as stupid as he looked. Of course, he was aware of what Zen was doing. However, he still couldn't understand one thing. Why did Zen dare to challenge him? Even if he had innate superhuman strength, he'd just reached the first stage of Other Shore Realm. Your reliance or any late bouts of regret doesn't matter now, said Fergus with a sinister expression. He then stepped forward. The soft soil suddenly cracked and collapsed. Fergus did not even flinch. He merely stood there, motionless, as if nothing had happened. Everyone went quiet while some retreated to a distance, not wanting to get hurt accidentally. Even so, such a fight between powerhouses was still destructive. Swish! The very next second, Fergus vanished from where he stood and rushed towards Zen. He acted so swiftly that no spectator even had time to react. Even several Alliance chiefs' jaws dropped at the unexpected sight. Only Zen kept up with him. Although he had always provoked Fergus, there was no instance that he would underestimate him. In the blink of an eye, the wild snow sword started to cut towards his head. Zen had seen too many powerful sword strikes and thought of this one as a standard move, but the strike actually provided him with a decent illusion. He had no choice but to face it head-on. No matter what method he resorted to, he would be cut in half. This sword strike, a thought crossed Zen's mind. It's the flow strike. I can't believe that Fergus has mastered it. He has such immense talent. Why would he stay in the Dragon City? Many of the Alliance chiefs who witnessed Fergus' sword strike were left puzzled. Zen had heard of the flow strike before. The flow swordsmanship could be found in one of the light columns on the Truth Library's 3rd floor. Zen became interested in the flow swordsmanship after hearing of it from the guard of the Truth Library. It was said that its user could read their opponent's mind and make perfect judgments through subtle changes. The user would also go into a flow state, completely absorbed in their actions. They could make the best decision calmly even in the face of an extremely powerful opponent. As a matter of fact, there was a major sect called Flow Sword Sect in the Oneness Sky Palace, and the flow swordsmanship was the most powerful sword skill of the sect. However, the guard of the Truth Library noted the high threshold needed to learn the flow swordsmanship. He said that the manual alone wasn't enough. In order to thoroughly learn it, one had to go to the Flow Tower in the Oneness Sky Palace. Though he was curious, Zen ignored this supreme swordsmanship manual because it was unsuitable at the time. As he faced Fergus' sword attack, Zen finally understood the feeling of the flow strike. He couldn't dodge it, but he had to. Fergus had forced him into a corner with just one strike. No wonder the flow strike was a supreme skill. Any other Alliance chiefs would be in a dead end. Unfortunately for Fergus, Zen was a different story. Even though Fergus was infinitely strong, Zen had no need to dodge. The 3 Annihilation Strike. After extracting power from the demonic eye, Zen gripped the snow sword tighter as it glimmered with mixed colors. 3 interconnected strands of the way's blending energy covered the sword's surface. Then their swords struck against each other. Bang! A dazzling white light surrounded the two again as the 3 Annihilation Strike caused an explosion. Fergus' face twitched slightly as he felt the impact from Zen's long sword. Zen had just unleashed the force of 20 divine megatons, striking power that was still far from his limits. However, Fergus himself fell into the flow state as he launched the flow strike. All the emotions that rattled him were quickly offset. He would attack like a puppet, striking repeatedly until he killed his opponent. After Zen's 3 Annihilation Strike sent him flying, he quickly turned around and made another chop. The strike was similar to the one before, and once again Zen could not dodge. Fergus struck with his sword for the second time before the light of the first 3 Annihilation Strike even disappeared. Boom, boom, boom. Those who had retreated in the distance could only see enormous balls of light gleaming one after another on the plain. The sight made the deafening sounds seem like thunder. The people who stayed nearby, on the other hand, either lay on the ground or stared at the two in shock. They could barely distinguish the 2 faint shadows clashing against each other. They didn't know how the fight was turning out. Fergus is so powerful. Who said that he was an unqualified Alliance chief? I think he is even more powerful than Yoan. Hey, don't forget his opponent. Upon admiring Fergus, they came to realize that they paid attention to the wrong person. Fighting Fergus in the white light balls was Zen, who had just reached the Other Shore realm. Despite being merely in the first stage of the Other Shore realm, he could already keep up with the powerful Fergus. As they witnessed the ongoing battle, the group felt ashamed. Unlike Zen, they felt that they had never progressed even years after reaching the first stage. Chapter 2676, Zen's Eye. Over 10 enormous balls of light appeared in the air, flashing brightly. Suddenly they stopped. Fergus remained floating, the wild snow sword by his side. Moments after he launched his fierce attacks, he had to stop, gasping for air. His physical body, overweight and weak, could not withstand the strain of his own attacks. He was fatigued. Zen stood across him, expressionless, a sword clasped in one hand. Tilting his head, he said, "Is that all you have?" Who are you?" Fergus asked, still wheezing. He faced Zen and pretended to be unfazed, but a trace of fear had entered his heart. Not even the best and most extraordinary young men in the Oneness Sky Palace were as powerful as this man. "Why should I answer that?" Zen asked, shaking his head. Fergus ground his teeth, frustrated. Whatever else they might be accused of, the members of the Oneness Sky Palace were not foolish, and Dragon City was not just a tourist spot. The Dragon City had been carefully planned. Everything in that bewitched city was designed to attract the most talented humans, and the rules set in place were intended to develop their abilities and identify out the most worthy among them. Fergus knew all this very well, as he had been an inhabitant of the Dragon City for many years. And he knew that a man possessing even half of Zen's strength would surely have been chosen by the Oneness Sky Palace immediately. It was impossible that such talent would go unnoticed for too long in the Dragon City. Fergus realized he might just be outmatched, but there was no way for him to retreat. Staring at Zen, he clenched his jaw and tapped the top of his own head. A white bone appeared above him. It was the unique frosty jade bone on stage 5 of the other shore. As soon as the other shore token appeared, gleaming white frost began forming on the wild snow sword in Fergus's hand. You are quite strong, especially for someone who has just reached the other shore realm. Warriors like you are rare even in the Oneness Sky Palace. Fergus' voice was low and cold, with a tone that had caused many a young man to tremble with dread. But you are not wise. Far from it. As he spoke, he raised his hand and pointed the wild snow sword at Zen. He wore a strange, cruel expression. You should have cultivated to develop your powers properly. Maybe in a year or so, you'll be able to defeat me, but right now you can't. Fergus was not nearly as confident as he pretended to be, but he set his misgivings aside. He had already decided to keep fighting Zen. He had always enjoyed defeating and suppressing young talents. Frigid sword prison, he shouted. The truths of godly ways and the swordsmanship manuals had the same big flaw. It was difficult for them to perfectly match with the other shore tokens. Zen, for instance, had fused with the demonic eye through the truth of cultivation nature. But they didn't match each other perfectly. Though the demonic eye resisted the truth of eternal sword intent but accepted the truth of cultivation nature, a more perfect match for the demonic eye would be the truth of goodwill and malice. Some people had devoted their time to studying the truth swordsmanship manuals, but later they found that they had fused with another shore token that didn't match properly with the truth swordsmanship, and they were very upset about it. For the Flow Sword sect, however, this was not a problem. This particular sect allowed its disciples to do whatever they wanted. Each of them was capable of comprehending the most suitable theurgy in the Flow Tower. Their theurgies were of their own creation with the help of the Flow Tower. And so every member of the Flow Sword sect comprehended a unique theurgy. A clatter sounded. As Fergus brandished his sword, icy sword shadows began spreading across the place. The icy sword shadows fused and interlocked with each other, forming an ice prison. Zen was trapped inside. The ice prison began shrinking rapidly. Zen would be chopped into pieces by the sharp edges of the icy sword shadows. I wouldn't be able to resist this strike, Yoan said, shaking his head as he assessed his own skills. If I gave it my all, I would probably be able to resist the flow strike, but this sword attack is beyond my capabilities. I would definitely die, Walter agreed. Someone else said, as for me, the first strike would have killed me already. While witnessing the battle between Zen and Fergus, some of the Alliance chiefs had believed that they were no match for Fergus. His strength was on a far different level than theirs. Galen, who had been hit early by Fergus, was just getting up from the ground. He had felt indignant at first, wanting to show Fergus what he could do. But the demonstration of power by Fergus and Zen had surprised him. There was no way a person of his level could hold his own in a battle like this. Had he sought to join the fight on Fergus' side, he probably wouldn't have been able to withstand Zen's sword attack. The sword prison should be on the same level as the third floor of the sword tower. Meanwhile, as Zen saw the icy cage shrinking around him, he allowed his body to become unusually flexible. He darted and jumped past the icy sword shadows with lightning speed. When there were icy sword shadows in his path that he couldn't avoid, he raised his sword and launched the 3 annihilation strike, smashing the obstacles into pieces. Fergus cast a stern glance at Zen, who floated in the frigid sword prison. With his eyes wide open, he entered the frigid sword prison, floating back and forth among the icy sword shadows. The shards of ice were bright and reflective. As soon as he entered, hundreds of mirror images of Fergus appeared in the frigid sword prison, and it was impossible to tell which one was the real person. The frigid sword prison could trap an enemy. If the person inside could fight off the icy sword shadows, then the icy cage would still be useful in launching an attack impossible to defend against. As for Fergus, he was the one who could kill his enemy inside the cage. If your force is, at most, 20 divine megatons, then you won't be able to resist this. Fergus shouted. His voice echoed and bounced off the icy sword shadows, adding to the confusion of his reflected images. Vigorously, Fergus began drawing out the power of the other shore token. Small cracks formed on the surface of the frosty jade bone. This was because the other shore token also had limits. Extracting too much power from the token would damage it. Then a large amount of divine crystals would be necessary to repair and replenish the power of the other shore token. The most common other shore token of stage 5 could have force of 15 divine megatons. In comparison, the frosty jade bone was quite strong. If all its power were extracted in a single blow, it could reach well over 40 divine megatons. Fergus intended to do just that. He would use all the power of the token to launch the flow strike, and it would make the attack extremely forceful and terrifying. He swished his sword. Under the cover of the icy sword shadows and his multiple reflections, he rushed towards Zen, determined to launch a final blow. This was his best and only plan. He had already exhausted all his strength in this attack, and he had to finish Zen off right now. This strike is strong, and troublesome for me, Zen thought. Even as he twisted and turned among the icy sword shadows, he kept an eye on the hundreds of fat figures reflected in the shards around him, wondering in which direction Fergus would attack. In terms of force alone, Zen believed that he was at least evenly matched with Fergus. But the nature of this attack was unusual, and difficult to overcome. He honestly couldn't tell which one among the figures floating around him was the real Fergus. If he didn't figure it out as soon as possible, Fergus would be able to kill him. Zen made a decision. As the shards closed in on him, the images of Fergus drew closer and closer. He narrowed his right eye. A ray of red light formed in his pupil, growing brighter and brighter. Fergus saw that Zen was squinting his right eye, and his heart skipped a beat. He did not understand what power this was, but he could sense the great threat hidden in the depths of that eye. However, there was no chance of backing down at this point. He had already deployed the flow strike. There was a loud bang. As Fergus drove forward, brandishing his wild snow sword, the icy sword shadows splintered into shards. In the same instant, Zen fully opened his right eye, emitting a beam of vivid red light. Fergus saw the red light and he faltered in his lunge, his entire body trembling. Fergus was not the only one affected. Everyone present had seen the red light in Zen's eye, and everyone was affected by it. They felt as though they had seen something dreadful and unbearable. Even the most courageous among them would be unable to look into Zen's terrifying eye. Chapter 2677, Heart-Slaughtering Strike. Zen used the demonic eye, but he didn't take this opportunity to kill Fergus. He just wanted to break the illusion created by the frigid sword prison. As Fergus' body stiffened, Zen found this window of opportunity to strike his enemy, yet he chose not to finish him off. Instead, he waited for Fergus to come to his senses. After Fergus maneuvered the flow strike, the mirage not only affected his opponent but changed himself as well. While Fergus functioned like a puppet, he was hardly affected by other things. Still, he couldn't escape the red light in Zen's eye. As soon as Fergus recovered from his immobile state, he quickly discovered that Zen did not take the opportunity to kill him. He thought he still had a chance. Both sides paused in midair to inhale quick, shallow breaths that lasted 6 seconds before the formidable sword of Fergus struck towards Zen. Zen raised his snow sword at the same time, and the wave's blending energy began to gather again. 6 Annihilation Strike. The more layers of wave's blending energy merged, the more explosive power it brought. With the 6 Annihilation Strike, he actually combined 5 layers of wave's blending energy. While he practiced the godly wave's blending swordsmanship, Zen often sighed with admiration as he regarded Eastern Emperor Tai as a real genius. If he carried on and just cultivated the godly ways blending swordsmanship without going to the other shore, he could still fight against the top warriors in the source world using the 1000 Annihilation Strike. He would be equipped to confront the toughest other shore token. The snow sword and the wild snow sword collided again. At first, Fergus was overjoyed that Zen gave him a break. However, the second their swords clashed, Fergus' heart quickly sank to the bottom of his stomach. It was then he realized that his strength was not on the same level as his adversaries. The power Zen unleashed was not something he could contend with. Bang! A mass of white light that was several times larger than before spread out and once again wrapped the two of them. The massive ball of white light covered the wilderness outside of the Dragon City as if it was covered with a thick blanket of snow. At the gate of Dragon City, the old man responsible for distributing the flags walked out of his room and looked up at the white light. His dimmed vision became bright under the radiant glow from a distance. He already mastered the 6 Annihilation Strike. He did it really fast. The old man muttered as he walked into the room with his hands behind his back. The light grew faint and faded away. Everyone saw Zen standing in the air on his own. Fergus lay on the ground not far away from him, fractures were seen all over his body. Streams of blood trickled out, and he was in the jaws of death. Late in Thurgy, Zen glanced at Fergus and flew towards his flag. The moment the 6 annihilation strike exploded, a latent theurgy popped out from above Fergus' head, which turned into a layer of solid ice and wrapped around him. This helped him neutralize a considerable amount of energy that Zen released. Since Fergus survived this attack, Zen decided not to kill him. Everyone went silent as the scene unfolded in front of them. They were utterly shocked by the final sword attack. A few talents resided in Dragon City. Occasionally, these rising new stars would be sent to the Oneness Sky Palace. But nobody could be as powerful as Zen. Swoosh! A white light dot streaked through the dusky sky from inside the Dragon City, and night fell. When the Alliance chiefs noticed this white dot of light, they all frowned. If one didn't stay within the circle of light released by a flag when nighttime came, even an Alliance chief would die. They could only come down from the sky. Walter inserted his flagpole to the ground to shield the others. One of the Alliance chiefs gently tossed the flag he was holding and placed it in the spot where Fergus was lying. Since Zen spared the life of Fergus, they decided to prevent him from being killed by the raining swords. No matter what, the mood of these Alliance chiefs was complicated. Gant puckered his lips in surprise and stared at Zen as if he were a monster. The disciples of the Sword Light Palace were full of worship toward Zen. Belden appeared extremely happy. After this battle, no one in or out of the Dragon City would even dare to provoke them. They were lucky to be able to join Zen. It could be imagined that more people would join Zen in the future. On one of the peaks of the Oneness Mountain, a gourd-shaped tower was located on one side of the peak. This tower, known as the Flow Tower, was also the core item of the Flow Sword sect. All those who practiced the Flow Strike had to go through the test of this tower. The Flow Tower had a total of 19 floors, and it was not easy for anyone to pass through so many floors. It was said that even some 5-star Oneness guards failed to pass through the last floor. The door of the 13th floor suddenly opened. A young man in a quar raincoat flew outside. After floating in the air for a while, he landed on a courtyard at the foot of the tower. Within the open area of the court, there stood cyan-stained stone pillars, and a person was locked on each of the pillars. The young man looked at them and said in an indifferent tone, "Set them free." Tink, 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 tink. As a series of mechanical sounds came from the courtyard, the metal chains that restrained these people all broke. These people were all powerful warriors in the 6th or 7th stage of the Other Shore realm. Some of them had violated the commandments of the Oneness Sky Palace, and several more betrayed the human race by siding with the non-human creatures. These warriors were remarkably ferocious and were sentenced to death. As per tradition, if you can kill me, you can leave this place. All your past mistakes will be written off, the young man said. A glimmer of hope flashed in the eyes of those people who heard this. The young man in front was only in the 3rd stage of the Other Shore realm. There were 13 of them in total. Without courtesy or any pleasant words, these people used their own unique skills and rushed towards the young man. But the moment they approached him, the young man suddenly raised his hand. On his palm was a cloud of air, as if he carried an invisible sword in his hand. But in fact, there was nothing. Flow strike, heart-slaughtering strike. The young man waved his empty hand gently in the air. With different kinds of sounds, the warriors who had not even rushed up to him yet spewed blood from their chests, heads, abdomens, and backs. All 13 people died in an instant. The invisible air actually infiltrated directly to their hearts, penetrating their elixir fields and souls. Clap, clap, clap. On one corner of the courtyard, a girl dressed in an orange garb stood straight, applauding softly with her slender hands. "When did you come, Kate? Why didn't you tell me in advance? You could get hurt by accident." The young man smiled when he saw her. "Didn't you know I'm here?" Kate sniffed, wrinkling her nose. The young man chuckled, "You always appear and disappear mysteriously. How could I know that?" Kate reached out her hand and rubbed the spot between his brows. Then she answered, "The income in the Dragon City has reduced by 50% in the past few months, and it reduced further by 90% in this month." "What happened? What did Fergus do?" The young man scowled, the creases on his forehead showing. He was in urgent need of divine crystals at this moment, and the income in the Dragon City was his only source of funds. Obviously, he attached great importance to it. Chapter 2678, The Man in a Quar Raincoat. With Fergus' strength, no one in the Dragon City dared to provoke him. The demand for sword-reading liquid exceeded the supply. Bottles of sword-reading liquid were sold out everywhere. It was definitely a lucrative business. The young man calculated that he could earn tens of millions of divine crystals each month from the robust sales of sword-reading liquid. Of course, the young man was not the only one in the Oneness Sky Palace capable of producing the sword-reading liquid. However, the others who could produce the liquid had their own reasons for not trying to compete with him. Some were simply not interested in the income, and others thought it shameful to get involved in such a business. This benefited the young man, who chose to stay in the flow sword sect. I heard that someone else was selling the sword-reading liquid at a lower price, to compete with Fergus, Kate said. The young man's brows furrowed. Someone else? Is it someone from the Oneness Sky Palace? But they've already said they wouldn't get involved in the sword-reading liquid business. Kate spoke up. No, it's not from Oneness Sky Palace. I think the new seller is a flag master in Dragon City. The young man wore an expression of disbelief. How can that be? No mere flag master could produce the sword-reading liquid, he said. Taking a look at the young man, Kate pursed her lips and said, he has just stepped into the other shore realm. But he defeated Fergus, though the latter spared no effort in the battle. What? The young man continued to look skeptical. You believe he's actually able to produce the sword-reading liquid? That he is capable of instant enlightenment? Well, yes, Kate said. There were often huge differences in the level of strength among the other shore realm warriors. Fergus, for example, had grown fat and complacent, and had been kicked out of the flow sword sect. Yet he was still a force to be reckoned with. He had already reached the 5th stage of the other shore realm, and he was in possession of a powerful other shore token. If I had just reached the other shore realm, it would be very difficult for me to face and defeat Fergus in an all-out battle, the young man said slowly. He frowned, wondering how a flag master had managed to beat Fergus. Come on, no need to be modest, Kate said. She had full confidence in the young man. Milo, you are adept at the emotion-closing godly way, and you have an innate capacity for the flow strike. Anyone affected by your flow strike finds it hard to resist. I believe that if you faced Fergus when you had just reached the other shore realm, you might have been able to win against him too. The young man gave her a noncommittal smile. He then left the courtyard quickly. Kate followed him. I want to meet him in person, the young man said, blinking rapidly. With knitted eyebrows, Kate replied, I'm afraid that might be hard to arrange. Why, do you think someone will stop me? The young man asked. I do, Kate said with certainty. When one reached a certain position, they became aware of many hidden and unspoken rules. The flag masters and alliance chiefs were blind to the existence of such rules. Someone like Fergus faintly sensed them, but had no ability to discern them in greater detail. But Kate was among those who knew and followed the invisible rules. So we'll just ignore the flag master? After what he's done? The young man looked upset. Even if you can't kill him, you can do something else to him, can't you? If you really want to see him, who would stop you? Kate asked with a smile. The young man quickly grasped her meaning. Killing was not the only way to solve a problem. He could definitely think of ways to contact and warn the flag master without resorting to killing him. The market outside Dragon City was a busy place. The owner of the best spot, a good location with a high flow of people, had been changed. Standing inside the shop, Kenom sighed inwardly, watching the crowds of people hurrying past the window. While his cultivation base hadn't improved much, he felt that his status had been significantly enhanced overnight. He and Belden had suffered in the past whenever they tried to sell the sword-reading liquid. Customers who bought from them would haggle non-stop, trying to drive the price down. They would argue about the costs of production, or openly question the purity of the substance. Kenom and Belden needed to figure out how to handle such concerns on their own, without relying on Zen to get involved. Otherwise, what good were they? However, the situation now was completely different. People who passed by the shop would slow down and look at them with respect. They no longer haggled over the price, and willingly shelled out 15,000 divine crystals to buy a bottle of the sword-reading liquid. Of course, in fairness, that was a relatively low price. Hello, my friend. Someone stopped in front of Kenom, giving him an innocuous smile. The man was obviously another shore realm warrior. He was polite to Kenom, even though Kenom had yet to master even the complete truth of godly way. Kenom heaved another inward sigh. He was not accustomed to this yet. Would you like to buy a bottle of sword-reading liquid? Kenom asked. No, not today. I'm here to meet your flag master. I'd like to join him, the man said smoothly. Ah, another one who wants to join Zen. Kenom thought. The battle between Zen and Fergus had assumed an almost legendary status, and many who heard the story wanted to join Zen's group. The problem was that it was considered taboo to change sides and join another flag master. The former flag master would go out of their way to make things difficult for the new one who took on their old follower. But Zen was different. He was not afraid of offending any flag master in or outside Dragon City. Go that way, to your left. Kenom gave the man directions. Not only were warriors switching sides to join Zen, but many of the newcomers who had just climbed over the sword wall also chose to join Zen's ranks. In just a week, the number of people under Zen had risen from 100 to 1,000. At that moment, a door opened softly on the third floor of the sword tower. Zen emerged from the room and walked slowly downstairs. As soon as he had disappeared down the stairs, another door opened. This time, Gant emerged from one of the rooms on the first floor. Gant had finally passed the tests in the room without getting kicked out. Had he managed this feat a month ago, he would have been greatly overjoyed. He would have gone straight to Sellers and tried to convince him to submit an application for him, so he could get admitted to the Oneness Sky Palace. However, he had become an admirer of Zen, and when he saw that Zen continued to train in Dragon City, he decided to stay for a while too. Congratulations! You've finally passed the tests of the first floor. Good job, Zen said in an encouraging tone. Gant sighed gloomily. I'm so much weaker than you. You've already passed the tests in the rooms of second and third floors. Sellers was standing at the entrance of the sword tower. When he heard Gant's words, he laughed openly at him. Ha, you've chosen the wrong person to compete with. Compare yourself to Zen, and you'll only get disappointed. Meanwhile, several people wandered into the sword tower. They were alliance chiefs. They were led by a man named Walter, who looked at Zen and gave him an ingratiating smile. Zen, we admire your diligence. You have spent so much time here in the sword tower already. We know practice can get boring, and we are ashamed of ourselves that we have not yet invited you to one of our gatherings. Would you like to join us? As soon as he saw Walter, Zen's face darkened. Thank you for the invitation, but I'm afraid I can't accept it. I'm too humble to stand behind such a person as you, he said in a mocking tone. Zen had no conflict with these alliance chiefs, and it was in his interest to maintain a good relationship with them. But the very sight of Walter filled him with disdain. When he thought of Walter's dubious morals, he couldn't help but feel antagonism towards him. Monica, for one, had been a follower of Walter. That night, when she had tried to put in a good word for Zen, Fergus punched her so hard that she almost died, yet Walter stood by and did nothing. He was truly cold-blooded. Walter saw that Zen despised him, and forced a wry smile. He had some idea of why Zen disliked him so much. He thought he could explain. But before he could speak, Zen and Gant started to move towards the tower entrance. Walter looked in Sellers' direction, hoping the old man would speak up and put in a good word for him. But Sellers kept his face expressionless. He did not say anything. As soon as Zen left the sword tower, he saw something that gave him a sudden and inexplicable sense of foreboding. A young man in a quar raincoat stood some distance away. He looked at Zen with gentle eyes. There was no hostility in his gaze, yet Zen felt as though he was being warned. The dread that rose in him was countless times stronger than what he had felt upon meeting Fergus. Chapter 2679, Disadvantage. A beautiful woman stood beside the young man wearing the quar raincoat. The woman's long dress was blindingly orange, and when it was ruffled by the wind, it seemed like she was engulfed in a dancing flame. Both of them were mediocre in their cultivation level, having reached no further than the third stage of the other shore realm. However, the auras they emitted were surprisingly strong. Sparing the young man a short glance, Zen turned to Gant. Let's go, he urged. The two of them walked quickly along the street and passed by the young man. Just as they passed him, however, he spoke. Please stop. Zen frowned, slightly annoyed. What? He asked with an exasperated sigh. Was the sword reading liquid made by you? The young man asked. A realization hit Zen. This young man was the one behind Fergus. If not for his question about the sword-reading liquid, Zen would never have guessed this young man's identity. He had expected the person behind Fergus to be exceptionally cultivated and old, not a gangly teenager. So what if it is? Do you have a problem with that? Zen retorted. The young man did not flinch. If you didn't make it, I'll kill you, he said simply, his eyes innocent like a child's. If you did, I will consider sparing your life. The incongruence between his wiry, youthful appearance and his words was almost comical. Zen snorted with laughter and indignation. Beside him, Gant looked furious. This is the Dragon City. Who do you think you are? How dare you commit murder here? He said icily. Glancing at Gant, the young man clenched his fist. Zen reacted immediately. This was not just an arrogant teenager. This was a formidable opponent. With a slight gesture of his hand, the snow sword appeared in it. This sword exuded a ray of surging radiance that gushed towards the young man like a tsunami wave. At the entrance to the sword tower, the alliance chiefs looked on with confusion. They did not know what had sparked the conflict. All they had seen was that Zen and the young man started fighting after their short exchange of words. The young man looked completely harmless, a mere teen. Zen's attack surprised them. However, the sword radiance of the 6 annihilation strike only spread out 8 inches from its source. After the air in the young man's hand had dissipated, Zen stiffly withdrew the 6 annihilation strike. The wave's blending energy was violent and difficult to control. Embarrassing as it was to admit it, Zen couldn't control it as well as the young man. All he could do was crudely merge it with his inner world and allow it to explode. What a loyal person. You treat your own subordinates well, the young man said with a shrug. As for Gant, he was completely confused. He had no idea what had happened. In fact, he hadn't even realized that he had already been in the gates of torture just a minute ago. Zen was convinced that the young man's intention had been to kill Gant instantly, without hesitation. If you attack my people again, you will regret it, Zen said seriously. The young man seemed completely unperturbed. Why would I? I would just attack you, he said matter-of-factly, smiling. Give it a try, Zen growled. The young man smiled sardonically, turning to the woman in orange beside him. Kate, I really think this man has gone too far. He is so arrogant and complacent. He acts like he is invincible, he said in a theatrical tone. Kate said nothing. Her only response was an artificial, emotionless smile. The young man turned back to Zen. Do you really think that I wouldn't dare to touch you? He asked. As soon as he finished his sentence, the young man began moving decisively towards Zen, his face filled with malice. Without drawing his sword, he charged towards Zen like a clumsy, skinny bull, his hand grasping what looked like a mass of air. As he approached Zen, he waved his arm. Zen took a second to assess the young man's attack, from his strange, grasping hand to his waving arm. Taking a deep breath, Zen lifted the snow sword above his head. With the wave's blending energy flowing from his hand, he wielded the snow sword so that it radiated a strange light. Phew, swish, phew, swish. To Zen's surprise and disappointment, the wave's blending energy did not explode. When the snow sword collided with the air in the young man's hand, the power of the 6 annihilation strike disappeared. Each time Zen wielded the sword, he launched a 6 annihilation strike. In this fight with the young man, the wave's blending energy he consumed exceeded almost tenfold the amount he had needed during his confrontation with Fergus. Additionally, the pressure on him was almost 100 times stronger. The young man kept advancing, maintaining impressive control over the air. In order to resist the air, Zen was forced to retreat over and over again. Gant's eyes were as wide as dinner plates. Kate was now smiling in earnest, and several of the Alliance chiefs looked baffled. Meanwhile, at the entrance to the sword tower, Sellers stood, clenching his fists nervously. His conversation with Athamar still lingered in his mind. He was unsure of whether or not he should intervene in the conflict. Under the pressure, Zen continued to retreat. The air in the young man's hand was becoming more dense and powerful by the second. At first, only shallow footprints were left on the solid stone surface while Zen retreated. As the pressure grew, the footprints became deeper and deeper. After he had taken 10 steps back, every additional step he took caused the stone surface to crack. 20 steps later, the snow sword suddenly broke with a clang. The broken snow sword shot out, ricocheting off a pillar of a nearby building. The collision generated a shockwave that blasted the structure apart. A second later, the entire building collapsed with a deafening crash, attracting the attention of almost everyone within the radius of a few kilometers. Meantime, the young man, still holding on to the air, now infinitely dense and powerful, pointed at Zen's neck. You think you know swordsmanship well? As you can see, you don't, he said arrogantly, his head raised. With a wave of his hand, the condensed ball of air disappeared into thin air. All the pressure on Zen vanished without a trace. Remember my name. My name is Milo Mo. Without further ado, the young man turned around and walked away, his arm around Kate's waist. However, before he could go much further, he heard a crisp tinkling sound behind him. It was the sound of the broken snow sword flying back into Zen's hand. You will compensate me for this broken sword. And then, I will prove that you are wrong, said Zen, seething. Milo turned his head to look at Zen, raising his eyebrows disdainfully. He obviously didn't take Zen seriously. He hasn't even answered your question yet, Kate whispered into his ear. I already know the answer, he answered simply. He did make the sword reading liquid. Otherwise, he would have died after taking 3 steps back. 3 steps, but he retreated 20 steps. Dang it, I hate to admit it, but I'm impressed, said Milo, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I expected him to collapse after 10 steps at the most. It seems that you feel threatened. Hee. Milo sighed, a little embarrassed for showing his anger. Yeah, those two fellows from the top of the Oneness Mountain are not weak. And this man came to the Dragon City on purpose to thwart me, he said, rubbing his temples. Zen and Gant stayed silent for a while. Then, Zen looked down at his broken snow sword. What a sad sight it was. Shaking his head, he smiled bitterly, and handed it to Gant. What should I do? He asked humbly. He had an affinity for the snow sword, and it had served him well. He hadn't expected it to break so soon. I can fix it, but it won't be easy, Gant said with a worried face. Before the snow sword broke so suddenly, Gant had been confused about Zen's fight with Milo. He had thought Zen was jesting. It was not until the snow sword was destroyed that he realized how much of a disadvantage Zen was at. In his eyes, Zen was a formidable warrior, rivaled by no one. Milo, however, had succeeded in overpowering him. Chapter 2680, Merit Points. Standing in a corner of the Dragon City was a young man in a blue robe. As he leaned against the wall, he breathed a sigh of relief. Not only him, there were also several people in other concealed places feeling relieved. As Zen and Milo fought, they watched nervously and with full attention. If Milo had the slightest intention of killing Zen, they would stop him from doing so. Milo was strong, even if his cultivation base was not high. His flow strike, however, was at its peak. If he wanted to, he could easily end Zen's life. Fortunately, Milo merely aimed for Zen's sword, broke it in half, and left. Milo is a lunatic, but it's a good thing he knows when to stop, the man in blue remarked before he hid himself again. The fight between Zen and Milo got so heated that they destroyed a building in the Dragon City. Despite it, no Dragon City guard appeared. The Dragon City was very powerful in the Bloom Divine Province, but it still served as a screening place for the Oneness Sky Palace. The guards knew they couldn't afford to offend those from the Oneness Sky Palace. In the middle of the night, the shimmering white stars turned into rain of swords and dropped towards the ground. Zen raised his head to look at the unattainable Oneness Mountain. His snow sword might be broken, but he was still smart enough to have reached an assessment of the situation. Since he had set foot in the Source World, he first went to the Swordlight Palace, and then came to the Dragon City. He had seldom met any peers who were on par with him. No one interested him the same way Dorothy did. Now he realized it wasn't because the people in the Source World weren't as talented as him. His position was too low for him to meet true geniuses. Flow Sword Sect. Milo's swordsmanship was so peculiar. He was able to use anything as a sword. He clenched a cloud of air, yet he was able to use it as a weapon no less powerful than Zen's 6 Annihilation Strike. Zen had tried more than 100 times to find a way to break Milo's sword strike in his mind. But no matter what he did, he wasn't able to do so. The only method he knew would work was if he could use the Imperial Sword Seal to activate the Soaring Snake Sword, but doing that would risk exposing his identity. Flag Master, are you still thinking about what happened earlier? Gant asked with a smile. Yes, replied Zen. Milo's younger than you, but remember that he is already in the 3rd stage of the Other Shore realm. It's not a surprise that you lost out to him though you were both capable of instant enlightenment, said Gant. Zen shook his head and said, the problem is not in the differences between our cultivation levels. There was not much difference between the 3rd stage and the 1st stage of the Other Shore realm. Besides, none of them used their Other Shore tokens. They just came from very different backgrounds. And that was all it took for them to have such varying performances in the battlefield. When Zen was still struggling in the Divine Land, Milo had already been a member of the Oneness Sky Palace. He had been standing high in the Flow Sword Sect's favor, and had been practicing hard in the Flow Tower. At that time, Zen was merely running around the Divine Land. He didn't even have an understanding on the truth of Godly Way or the Other Shore. You just have varying cultivation levels. When you reach his level, I'm sure you can defeat him. Gant patted Zen's shoulder reassuringly. Hopefully, Zen said with a smile. Oh, by the way, it's time for you to consider becoming an Alliance Chief, remarked Gant. In the Dragon City, one could only become a Oneness Guard, the ultimate goal for all Flag Masters, by first becoming an Alliance Chief. Do I have to go to the Dragon City to apply for it? Zen asked. Gant nodded. Yes, you'd need to go to the old man at the entrance of the Dragon City. To become an Alliance Chief, you need to have a certain number of followers, but it shouldn't be long before you reach it. However, you are still short of merit points. Merit points? What can I do to earn them? Zen asked. Kill the non-human creatures. Gant's eyes glimmered menacingly. The various races had been at war since the birth of the Source World. They were always in conflict with each other. The Oneness Guards of the Oneness Sky Palace shouldered the responsibility of killing the non-human creatures and guarding the territory of the human race. Zen had long known that he could take tasks from the Dragon City and train in the outside. However, he had only been here for a short period of time, so he had not thought about this before. But now it seemed that he needed merit points so he could first become an alliance chief. Through Gant, Zen had figured out how to do so. In the Bloom Divine Province where the Oneness Sky Palace was located, many powerful masters resided. No race dared to offend them. The Oneness Sky Palace was in control of 13 provinces. 6 of those were at war, including the Mountain Viewing Province. The Oneness Sky Palace had sent many Oneness Guards to control it, yet there were always counterattacks from other races. Thus, the Dragon City issued many tasks that required the warriors to go to the Mountain Viewing Province to kill the non-human creatures. Zen accepted Gant's suggestion. He also made sure Dorothy knew of his plan to go to the Mountain Viewing Province. Dorothy was, unsurprisingly, worried. That place is in unrest. The Oneness Sky Palace might even move out of this province. Isn't it too dangerous for you to go there? The Oneness Sky Palace might abandon the province. Why, are we unable to defeat the non-human creatures? Zen inquired. He met a similar story in the Swordlight Palace, which had been destroyed by the powerful non-human creatures. However, Oneness Sky Palace was one of the strongest forces of the human race. They had plenty of mighty warriors. Zen couldn't comprehend why they were on the verge of giving up. Dorothy chuckled and shook her head. You don't know much about the Source World, she said. The enemy in the Mountain Viewing Province is the Sun Crow race. The most powerful among them is Emperor Charm. He is as powerful as Eastern Emperor Tai. Really, he is as powerful as Eastern Emperor Tai? Zen raised his eyebrows. In Zen's eyes, Eastern Emperor Tai was on the same level as his grandfather, Chiyu. He wondered how a master from the Sun Crow race could possess that much power. Think carefully, please. The tasks from the Dragon City may not be as difficult as the Oneness Guards, but you can never be too sure. In his mind, Zen knew Dorothy was right. But his mind was set and no amount of convincing would change it. From the moment he entered the Dragon City, Zen had made up his mind that he wouldn't plead with Athamar or Winchell. So he didn't bother to ask them to let him join the Oneness Sky Palace. Zen had relied on himself and would continue to do so. He was strong enough to move forward on his own and make it in the Oneness Sky Palace. Don't worry, I have considered this thoroughly, Zen reassured Dorothy. But this did not ease Dorothy. She knew that Zen was stubborn in his own ways. He was definitely going to do it, and she would not be able to stop him. Zen met with his followers and discussed the arrangements with them. Belden and Elgin would take care of everything while Zen was away, and if there was any trouble, Monica would help them. The Alliance chiefs were already intimidated by Zen. He could leave the Dragon City and they wouldn't give Zen's people a hard time. Then Zen and Gant went to the Dragon Shadow Pavilion of the Dragon City, where the tasks from the Dragon City were delegated. Initially, Zen wanted to go to the Mountain Viewing Province alone, but Gant had insisted on coming along. Zen had no choice but to let him.